We're going to start with the GRAMA training portion of the Open Meetings Training and Government Records Access and Management Act, or GRAMA training today. We've got, it's exhilarating every year. Please come on up, Margaret, Cindy, and Nicole Smedley. Hi, thanks for teaching us again.
Thanks for having us.
You do a pretty good job of keeping it fresh every year. We
try.
appreciate that.
We try to make it exciting. Okay, so you have a handout, and the PowerPoint's the same information, just maybe a little more visually stimulating, we hope. So we're here to talk about the Government Records Access Management Act, lovingly referred to as GRAMA. And Utah enacted the GRAMA law in 1991 with some specific intents: to promote the public's right of easy and reasonable access to unrestricted public records, to prevent abuse of confidentiality by government entities, to provide guidelines for disclosure and restrictions on access to government records, and to establish fair and reasonable records management practices. And the legislature recognizes two constitutional rights: the public's right of access to information concerning the conduct of the public's business, and the right to privacy in relation to personal data gathered by governmental entities. And so record is defined very broadly to include almost any document or electronic record prepared, owned, received, or retained by the city. And GRAMA gives us 4 records classifications: public, private, controlled, and protected. And we've provided you some examples in your handout of each of those types of records. The majority of the city's records are probably public with some private or protected information mixed in. We really don't have many controlled or psychiatric or psychological records that we maintain here. The city has a retention schedule, and it describes each of our records and how long it needs to be kept. And the theory behind that is it reduces the time that we have to spend searching for records and reduces our storage volume. And we work with staff all the time to keep those up to date, and they're found on the Recorder's intranet site. And so the way that a person makes a GRAMA request, it has to be in writing. And so they could do it by mail, they could walk it into the office, they could send us an email, but about 95% of them use our Public Records Center, just because it's easy. And when they go to that center, they have 5 different database sets that they can search for the information they're looking for first. We can try and guide them there, but if they can't find what they're after, then they're free to make a records request, and it's a pretty simple procedure. And I thought this graph was really interesting because you can see that each year we have more and more and more. This year we had 14,202 records requests. Estimates say that cities spend about 4.5 hours a day fulfilling GRAMA requests. And you can see that police, they're the ones who receive the most GRAMA requests, with airport, fire, and city kind of tying for the remainder of those. But we have a GRAMA coordinator in each of our departments that we work closely with, and then we have about 200 staff people that work to fulfill those GRAMA requests across the city. And Salt Lake City has an established fee schedule for records, and we have the lowest fees in the state. So we encourage people to look for records. GRAMA defines a response time to records request of 10 days. And the media likes to request expedited request of 5 days sometimes. And we do our best to fulfill those. If a person's not satisfied with our response, then they can file a denial. They have 30 days. And then once that happens, Patrick Leary has been designated as the mayor's hearing officer, and he has 10 business days to respond to that appeal. And if a requester still isn't happy, they can appeal their decision to the State Records Committee or to district court. And I think it's interesting, of those 14,202 requests, we only had 7 appeals last year. So I think that kind of indicates what a great job staff does in fulfilling those requests and making people happy. So again, records broadly defined. It can include any kind of media, and more we're getting different types: text messages, email, body cams, DVDs, cloud, USBs, just social media, all kinds of records to consider now, when it used to just be paper. The number one question my office receives is, how long do I need to keep email? And I wish it was a simple across-the-board answer, but it's not, because it depends on the content of the email. And it definitely could be subject to grandma or discovery. And the average user receives about 88 emails a day. And if we have 3,000 employees, that's almost 10 million annually. So a huge volume. And to us, success, I can't see my screen, sorry. It's records management is a citywide priority. Frequent education and communication, maintaining up-to-date business applicable retention schedules, collaboration with IMS, legal, compliance and risk, and realizing cost savings and efficiency opportunities, and transparency and improved searching and sharing. And I think we're really meeting all of those objectives very well. And with that exciting presentation, we're happy to entertain any questions.
Council members, do you have any questions on records, emails?
I would just comment that the Recorder's Office does a really great job. I mean, they are total experts in, what is a record, how long does it need to be kept, where does it need to be, and they serve as a resource not only to you all and to council staff, but to the rest of the city departments. Now, that said, all city employees need to be aware of grandma and know something about it, just like all of you need to know something about it, because you're all really creating your own records, and Cindy does a really great job of talking about it as, we used to have people who helped us file our documents, helped us sort them, and they were responsible for them really for an office, and now we're all our own records custodians. So these guys are a fabulous resource. They do a great job. She's right that we have not had that many appeals. I will point out that we currently have one case pending before the Utah Supreme Court and one case pending before the Utah Court of Appeals, and they're both purely grandma questions. So, much to maybe the dismay of other local subdivisions, we do end up sometimes taking grandma cases to court because we need to find out what the law really means. And so we've got 2 of those pending.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I had a question.
Please.
I guess mine is more in regards to social media, because this is a newer aspect for us. What is considered, something that they can use as grandma on social media?
And we do get requests for like a history of our postings on certain sites. And we do archive the city sites so that in case we had to go back, we could produce those. Are you asking like content?
Or as an individual, if, say, somebody as a council member were to post something, a message sent to somebody, is that something that can be grandma'd?
If you were, and I might defer to Margaret, but if you were posting it in your role as a city council member versus on your private social media site, then perhaps.
Okay.
There's not a great answer. You always have to ask yourself, am I doing this in my capacity as an elected official? People always say, is that subject to grandma or is that grandma-able? I would just remind you, everything is grandma-able. Whether it has to be produced is really the important question, right? People can ask for anything. Nicole just sent me a 3-page grandma request that we received today that specifically asks for some social media information from the council's social media pages. And like Cindy said, they archive some of it and follow certain retention schedules, and we produce it when we have it. But social media wasn't contemplated in the legislation, and you just have to analyze it for the content. It's not the form of the record, it's the content.
Thanks. Anyone else? Andrew?
Yeah, thank you very much. I know that in the last 2 years we had a discussion about the fees, and I don't remember how we changed them or what, but are your fees compensating enough to take care of 14,000 requests, essentially? Is it anywhere close, or where are we at?
Probably not. Historically, the council has liked to keep the fees low just to allow people the ability to request and receive records.
Mm-hmm. Would we have a sense if we asked later on about how far behind we are in our sort of our costing these or paying for it?
And we have, our system can actually track the amount of time we spend and the amount of fees we collect.
Mm-hmm.
And we've never really produced that, but it's lagging very behind.
Yeah.
And Cindy has pulled information over the years for what other governmental entities are charging per hour. So I think in 2013, the council raised the hourly fee from $10 an hour to $11 an hour. But State Archives, for instance, I think charges $38 an hour.
Something like that, yeah, 35, 38.
I hope we aren't paying Nicole and Cindy $11 an hour.
We are absolutely not. But it does show you that, I mean, the case before the Utah Supreme Court is about, in large part, fees. And part of what we've been, discussing with the court is whether or not our fee is reasonable under the law. And, clearly we believe it is. It's the lowest in the state. And in fact, some of the case law that's being relied on is now 20 years old. And in those cases, like one of them's a Davis County case, Davis County was charging $20 an hour 20 years ago. And we were charging $10 an hour when this particular request came up. And so it's really a policy question for the council. How much do we want to subsidize access to records, which under the law we have to do anyway, because you can't charge more per hour than the lowest paid individual who's responsible for retrieving the records gets paid. So it's already meant to be subsidized, and I think that's clear policy determination by the state legislature. But you have to balance that against, does an artificially low fee mean that people aren't motivated to narrowly tailor their request? And again, these guys and the other records custodians in the city, I think, do a nice job of working with individuals to help them narrowly tailor their request, but an artificially low fee may discourage people from narrowing their request, which just means city employees will spend more time responding to grammar requests. That's not an inherently bad thing, but it's a policy decision that needs to be made by the council.
So if I were to hear you correctly, that any fee we see anywhere else in the state should match the lowest, or not exceed the lowest paid individual retrieving the record for that entity. Is that accurate?
Can't exceed the
Can't
lowest
exceed
paid
that.
individual who's responsible for
So if there's a $38
function.
an hour fee to retrieve something, that means that theoretically no one in that office is getting paid less than $38 an hour, right?
Correct.
Okay,
Did I misspeak?
No.
No.
okay. Thank you.
Any other council members? Nicole and Cindy, thank you. You do a phenomenal job, and we hope that as the growth of grammar requests continues, that you will be willing to perhaps continue conversations with the council about our policy direction on what those fees should be. And it sounds like perhaps, Councilmember Johnston, we might be interested in asking them to do that assessment of the actual time spent and looking at a cost justification.
Yeah, I want to at least visit a little bit, because if we're litigating a reasonable fee that's so much lower than anybody else, that's a strange sort of predicament to be in. But I don't want to discourage access, obviously. But if we're that far behind, much lower than anybody else we're seeing, that tells me that maybe there's some wiggle room in there to look at helping them cover some costs a bit, at least in the time they're spending, and get help. So,
Well,
And just to be clear, we're not litigating purely whether the fee was reasonable. We're litigating whether or not our denial of a request to waive the fee was reasonable. But as part of that, we've had to litigate our fees.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing more about that to see if we have a discussion about it.
certainly whatever subsidy is inherently built into the current fee is compensated for by other activities that all those employees who assist with grammar records every day do. And so we're paying for it in whatever other ways our bandwidth is limited or other fees are compensating. So I think it's a worthwhile discussion, maybe one to bring up in between here and the budget as we work with the administration on what we hope to see there. Thank you, Cindy and Nicole.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the Open and Public Meetings Act. Is it, Margaret, are you alone at the table with us?
So Katie Lewis is going to
Hi,
join me for
Katie.
this. You guys know Katie. She's primary counsel for the redevelopment agency. The last 4 years, it's been me and Boyd Ferguson who have done this. I see he's here to keep tabs on me and Katie.
Way in the back, Boyd.
Boyd is sort of the office guru on GRAMA and Open and Public Meetings Act, but this year he decided to share the excitement, and Katie's going to be taking the laboring oar on the presentation this year.
Thank you, Katie.
Hi there. Thank you very much. As Margaret said, my name is Katie Lewis, and I'm a senior city attorney. And whenever I do this Open Meetings Act training, I like to start it by sort of thinking about the main purpose of the act, which is, in my opinion, transparency. And so you think about it sort of from start to finish with the meeting. The City Council as a public body, the act wants the council to provide the public access, provide the public notice, provide the public an opportunity to participate when appropriate, and then also if there are instances when the public wants to go back and see what was in the record and what the council has talked about previously, provide them access in that respect too. So transparency is the mission of the Open Public Meetings Act. The general rule is that meetings of a public body are open to the public unless there's an exception that allows for the meeting to be closed. And the sort of threshold point, first of all, is that the Salt Lake City Council is a public body, and so your meetings are subject to the requirements of the act. The next question then is, what is a meeting? At what point do we need to be complying with the requirements of the act? And what the act says is that a meeting is the convening of at least a quorum of the council to discuss essentially matters over which you have jurisdiction, to take comments or to act on those matters. So thinking about that then, we often get the question, okay, well, what meetings are subject to the act? Electronic meetings, which I'll talk about in a little bit, retreats, workshops, convening here at your anchor location, field trips. Instances when you might not be convening a meeting would be chance meetings. If a quorum of you all run into each other on the street, you don't have to feel like you're going to violate the act. Social gatherings, or instances where there is no quorum. Now, of course, those first two, chance meetings and social gatherings, shouldn't be used to circumvent the act. So if you're all at the holiday party standing in a corner talking about matters over which you have jurisdiction, then you have circumvented the act, and we recommend that you are careful about doing that. So again, once now we've sort of set the thresholds of when there's a meeting that would be subject to the act, then we think about how do we let the public know what your meetings will be, what you'll discuss, what the content of the meetings, where they will be, so that they can participate or attend. So the first question then is, how do we provide public notice? And the act says that the notice should be posted at the principal office of the council, on the Utah Public Notice website, and published in either a newspaper of general circulation or provided to your local media correspondent. So then the next question is, okay, well, what exactly do we have to provide as part of that notice? And there are a few different categories. The first would be your annual meeting schedule. So the act requires that on an annual basis, the council provide notice of when your regularly scheduled meetings will be. That's the date, time, and the place. One question that recently came up is, does that annual meeting schedule need to be revised if we schedule a special meeting? And the answer to that is no. But if, for instance, the council decided, you know, we really have so much work that we're also going to be starting to meet on a consistent basis on the second Thursday of every month, then you would want to revise your annual meeting schedule, because that really has become one of your regularly scheduled meetings rather than just a special meeting. So then the next category is providing notice of every meeting that you have, whether it's a special meeting or a regularly scheduled meeting. And the act requires that you provide at least 24-hour notice of your meeting, and that notice include the agenda, date, time, and place of your meeting, again, so that the public knows where and when they should come. Your council agendas even go a step further than that and put approximate times for specific items too, which I think is a really helpful tool for the public. If they only want to come to one item, they know that they can get here at 4:45 instead of coming at 2 and sort of speculating on when an item would be discussed. Another question that often comes up is, well, what exactly should we put on the agenda? And the act says that agendas must have at least enough information that a member of the public would be able to understand with reasonable specificity what you're going to talk about. So an example that I have heard is for Open Meetings Act training, if you had just put on your agenda Katie Lewis and Margaret Plain, Salt Lake City Attorney's Office. The public might wonder if we're going to be talking to you about something salacious or, updating you on litigation, when actually we're giving you very interesting Open Meetings Act training. And so that's an example of why reasonable specificity is important, so that people know whether or not they should come and attend or listen on SLC TV. Another question that sometimes comes up is, well, what if there's a matter that's not on the agenda? Can we talk about it? And what the Act says is that at the discretion of the chair, if a matter has been brought up by the member of the public and you all would like to discuss it, you may, but you may not take final action on that item. It should be on a subsequent agenda for you to discuss and formally take action on later. So then there's another category of meetings, and the notice is a little bit different for that, and that's emergency meetings, which are defined as meetings that you hold because of unforeseen circumstances that require consideration of matters that are urgent or an emergency. And the Act requires that you provide the best notice practicable for that, of the time, place, and the topics that you will discuss, and that before that meeting is held, an attempt is made to notify all the council members of the meeting, and a majority of the council members approve holding that meeting. Even though the notice may be less than 24 hours in those cases, the council can take final action on matters on an emergency meeting agenda. So, as you can see, the rule then is that most meetings should be open, but there are exceptions when a meeting can be closed to the public, and the Act actually has specific exceptions.
Katie, sorry, can I back you up to the
course.
emergency meetings and the majority approval?
Hmm.
I'm assuming then that majority approval is all disclosed in whatever records are kept about the meeting itself?
Yes, I think that that's a great practice, to be sure that you can point back to your compliance with the Act because you've provided more limited notice in those instances.
But it doesn't require us to do so?
I've never
Good.
been asked that question before. I can go back and look, but again, I would say when you're thinking about convening the meeting, because the notice has been shorter than 24 hours, if in that emergency setting, the chair or whoever was presiding said, we've got a majority here, that's created a quorum, we all approve of holding this meeting in an emergency setting, then that at least provides evidence that you have complied with that notification and approval process.
Okay. Thank
May I
you.
ask a question, Madam
Please.
Chair, on the emergency meeting as well? Do you have any examples of when we've done that in the past, emergency meetings? Has it happened, I guess?
Happened in my 11 years.
There's a very foreboding
Hasn't
second
happened
row
in-
behind you,
It hasn't
though.
happened in Boyd's 21 some years. So emergency meetings are truly emergency meetings. Something has come up that requires the council action. It was totally unforeseen, and therefore fewer than 24 hours notice is necessary. So the kinds of things that may necessitate it are on your agenda next, right? So if there were an earthquake or some other disaster where the council wanted to act quickly on an appropriation, even though the administration has some latitude in those circumstances, but it's truly for an emergency circumstance.
I think Jennifer Bruno wants to add something.
Yeah, in general, our notice for our meetings is actually well in excess of 24 hours because we tend to put out the agenda on Thursday or the Friday before the meeting. So in our world, the emergencies are the 24-hour notice. So to Margaret's point, a true emergency would be the less than 24 hours thing. But yeah, not that I know of.
Thank you. So there are some instances when the council can close its meetings to the public, and the exceptions are specifically listed in the Act. And I'm just going to go through those, and then if you have any questions, we can talk about them because they're pretty specific. So the council can close a meeting to discuss the character, mental health, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual, to have a strategy session to discuss collective bargaining, to hold a strategy session to discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation, A strategy session to discuss the purchase, exchange, lease of real property, including water rights and water shares, if, and these two exceptions have to also be met, if public discussion would disclose the appraisal or estimated value of the property under consideration or prevent the city from completing the transaction on the best possible terms. Sessions to discuss the sale of real property, also including water rights or water shares, if public discussion of the transaction, again, would disclose the appraisal or estimated value of the property or prevent the city from completing the transaction on the best possible terms. And the city previously gave public notice that the property would be for sale, and that the terms of the sale are publicly disclosed before the sale is actually complete. So purchase and sale are two sort of different processes. There's these additional exceptions for the sale of real property that we could walk you through if you ever were in that situation to close the meeting. You can also close the meeting to discuss deployment of security personnel, devices, or systems, to discuss investigative proceedings regarding allegations of criminal misconduct. And then there is a common law exception that the council can close a meeting to discuss legal advice from its legal counsel. There is a specific process for closing a meeting. So the council has to first open a meeting where a quorum is present, and then 2/3 of the council present has to approve closing the meeting. When the meeting is closed, there does have to be a public announcement and the following things entered into the minutes: the reason for closing the meeting, the location of the meeting, and the vote by name of each council member to either close or not close the meeting.
I'm just going to jump in because this comes up all the time. When you all go to close a meeting, you'll often hear me pop up and offer an additional basis for closing the meeting, and that's because the law requires you to specifically state the basis for which you're closing it. So we want to make sure you have all the options available to you. The other thing is the chair will usually roll call closing an open meeting and opening a closed meeting, and that's again to meet the statutory requirement. The last sort of practice tip on that is that under state law, an executive session is a type of open meeting. A closed meeting is not an executive session, although in City Hall we tend to call closed meetings executive sessions. My office doesn't do that because, again, under the statute, that's a type of open meeting. So we'd prefer you called them closed meetings. Executive sessions really are open meetings.
Thank you. So going back to my general theme of transparency, the Open Meetings Act also has a process for how records of your meetings are kept. Again, thinking about the public, they may not want to know what you talked about today. They may want to know what the council talked about 6 months ago, and so how do we preserve that information so that they can have access to that? And there are two different standards for open meetings and closed meetings. In an open meeting, the council is required to keep both a recording, which is an unedited recording of the entire meeting from beginning to end, and also written minutes of the meeting. Those need to include the date, time, and place of the meeting, the members present and absent, substance of all matters discussed and taken action on, record of any vote taken, name of anyone else who provided comment or testimony or a presentation to the council, and any other information requested by a member of the council. It's important to know that the official record of the meeting is actually the written minutes. It's not the recording, but we also keep the recording. Closed meetings have a separate type of records kept. You are required to keep a recording of the meeting. There are two exceptions to that, but generally you're required to keep a recording, and you may keep written minutes. The recording must say the date, time, and place of the closed meeting, and also the names of all present and absent, unless disclosing the name of somebody who's present would impair the confidentiality or the reason that the meeting was closed in the first place. The exception is if the council is discussing either the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual, or the deployment of security personnel or devices or systems, you do not have to keep a recording or minutes for a closed meeting on that. The Recording/minutes in a closed meeting are actually protected records under GRAMA, so they are kept, and if there was ever somebody who claimed that the council closed the meeting improperly, that could be something that could go to the State Records Committee for consideration.
And we do occasionally get requests for recordings of the closed meetings, and one did go to the Records Committee recently, and we did not have to turn those over, but once again, usually somebody from my office is in those meetings, helping to make sure we're all staying on track and within the bounds of the purpose for which it was closed, so,
Councilmember Wharton has a question.
yes.
Yes.
So just with the exceptions on closed meetings, the scope, when you say character or professional competence, is that does it have to be about a member of the body, or can
Nope.
it be anyone's?
It's of an individual, and so that's read very broadly. Sometimes it's of an employee, sometimes it's of, a staff member, which is the same thing, a council staff member or an
Right.
administrative employee. Sometimes it's an applicant for a position. Sometimes it's, somebody who interacts with the city, and if there's an issue about their professional character or their competence, it could be a board member. It's
Okay.
a pretty broad,
And
allowance.
same with deployment of security personnel and devices. Does it have to be like things that are directly within the jurisdiction of the city, or could it be like any security?
I would have to look at it. We've always done it as about, related to the city, but if the council had a need to be briefed on something, I think the statute would allow for it. I'll have to look at the specific language. I don't know if you.
Thank you.
I would agree with Margaret on that.
Okay, thanks.
So I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I do want to touch on a couple more items, and that is questions that sometimes come up about electronic meetings. And I really view this in two separate categories. One is if there is a council member who would like to call or FaceTime or Skype into a meeting, is that allowed? And the act says that if the city has passed a resolution, rule, or ordinance allowing it, then you can, pursuant to the terms of that ordinance. And in this case, City Code 206030E specifically relates to the council. And what it says is that a majority of a quorum must be physically present at your anchor location. And if that is the case, then the other members who would make up the quorum may call or FaceTime or electronically participate in the meeting.
So under those emergency circumstances, if a majority of us couldn't get to the building, we cannot hold an official meeting.
So actually, City Code 206030 also has an exception for emergency circumstances when, if you can't all make it to the anchor location, I'd have to go back and look at it specifically, but it provides exceptions for that. So that if there's if there's an emergency proclamation in place, you've got some leeway there that we could help you out with if, heaven forbid, there was ever that type of a circumstance.
Okay, thank you.
So you are required to provide the usual notice, so 24-hour notice, agenda, date, time, and place, all of those. But whoever is calling or Skyping or FaceTiming in can take action and act just like you would if you were physically present here. The next questions that we often get is, oh, absolutely.
Yeah, please, Councilmember Fowler.
Thank you. So how would the person Skyping in or somehow joining in electronically record that for, to follow the statute along with, if I was texting him, for example, or something, if that was, is that allowed? Or emailing or somehow, or what, does it have to be via a more, so there's like 3 questions in that one question, Margaret. So you and Katie can figure out what I'm asking.
So I think from a practical perspective, it would be difficult to text or email in because it's sort of difficult to participate as a member. So typically what I have seen is somebody either calling or FaceTiming or Skyping. So, and then the participation, the recorder can, record just as though you were here, all of your comments and participation in the same way. So I guess if you wanted to participate in some other way, we would have to look at how that technology works and how we would make sure your participation was meaningful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Madam Chair, not to go too far on this, but you need a quorum present physically to have a meeting, right? So 4.
Correct.
To take any business, and so if you were to have 4 here and say 2 called in, as we have had at least 1 call in previously, do those votes get recorded as normal if they called in, even though you couldn't do that if you only had 3 present and say 3 away?
So just to back up, in order to allow those extra people to call in, you first have to have a majority of a quorum physically present here at the site.
Majority of a quorum or a quorum?
Majority of a quorum.
Quorum.
Yeah,
Okay.
so you have to have 3
3.
present here, and then those additional people could call or FaceTime in, and then, if they were, let's say 2 other people were voting, they can vote by just saying over the phone aye or nay or whatever, and their votes be recorded just as any others would be.
Okay. So there's majority of a quorum then present physically.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thanks.
Yes. So then the next questions that we sometimes get is, what about if we are texting or emailing or conversing electronically, either during a meeting or outside of a meeting? At what point is that considered a violation of the Open Meetings Act? So the Act has what I view as sort of a strange provision in it, and it says that a council member is not restricted from transmitting an electronic message, like a text or an email, to other council members at a time when the council is not convened in an open meeting. So that to me, I don't know if you have any thoughts on how that's been used, but
Well, I
Take
would
it
just
away.
say really quickly, and again, we want to be cognizant of the time, that when the legislature passed that addition to the statute, I think it was their attempt at passing something while not saying anything. And so they sort of left the question about elected members of a body texting each other while in a meeting for another day. And I think what we would say is, it's not a practice that we're going to encourage. It doesn't necessarily violate the Open Meetings Act so long as there's not a quorum on your text string. But think about the purpose of the Open Meetings Act, which is to allow the public to see your business being conducted and to be able to fully hear and participate in the discussion to the extent that's, part of your agenda. And so the legislation is a double negative. It doesn't answer the question about whether, it doesn't make it a violation for you all to text each other while you're sitting here in a meeting. But again, I don't think that's a practice that is incredibly transparent. And when you're doing that, you're creating records that may be subject to grandma.
So, and just one other point that I would make on that, if there is an instance where, let's say, staff emails out an agenda to the entire council and somebody pushes reply all and says, I really want to talk about A, B, C, and D, and then somebody reply all, oh, well, here's the way that I feel. Be cognizant that you have just convened a quorum to discuss matters over which you have jurisdiction, and so you have effectively violated the Open Meetings Act. So the better strategy is to think about discussing in small committees, or of course waiting until you're open, you're sitting in your open meeting with the quorum and have your discussion here in the public.
And council staff has really great alarm bells to help you all navigate this.
So the final thing two final things that I would say is, first of all, if there are instances where somebody is disrupting your meeting and making it so that you cannot do your business, the Act does provide the ability for that individual to be removed if they are willfully disrupting your meeting and your orderly conduct of business is seriously compromised. My final point is that it is a Class B misdemeanor to knowingly violate the closed meeting portions of the Act, and private individuals can bring lawsuits for a violation of the Act. A suit must be commenced within 90 days or 30 days if it's having to do with the issuance of bonds. And then finally, I would like to thank you for your service and the time that you take sitting on the City Council and the RDA Board. We very much appreciate your time and your attention to this training.
And thank you for your help in making sure that we dot all the i's and cross all the t's. And also to our own staff for your alarm bells. I think we're actually a very good body about not talking. We don't even hang out.
No,
It's
they
just
do
better that we aren't friends that way, huh?
a great job, and we're so glad you're all here because the state law does require all the members to be trained annually, which is why one training suffices for both boards, because it's not the board that needs the training, it's the members. So thank you for your attention and your
So
question.
you're done for your RDA training too this year.
We can wear both hats this one time.
Yes.
Thank you,
Thank you.
ladies. Next is our item number 2, informational item with the Salt Lake City Emergency Management Update for 2018. I have Eric Witt on here, but I know that there's others in the audience, so if you need to call anyone else up, please feel free. Thanks for joining us, Eric.
Thank you very much.
This is the rosy meeting of the year, really. when
This is
we-
the Chicken Little meeting, where you guys all get to run out of here and move away and everything. But no, I'm filling in for Corey today. My name's Eric Witt, for those who haven't met me. I am the Training and Exercise Coordinator for Salt Lake City Emergency Management. And today, we're going to talk about a few things. One of the things I want to give really big kudos to our office. This was a big year for us this year. One of those things was Safe Neighborhoods. It is a program that we have for the fact of if we do have an earthquake. We were able to get 27 just-in-time training kits out to all the schools this year, which is a huge, huge accomplishment. John worked really hard to get those out, and because he worked so hard, the state recognized him with an award, a preparedness award, and then also he got an award for internationally for SAFE because it's a brand new program, and I'm sure he's probably going to be training a lot of people throughout the United States on how this program works, and so hopefully they can take it then and use it in their own jurisdictions. John also trained about 170 people in not only English but Spanish, working with Kenja Renee, our public information or multi-coordination outreach coordinator. And then we also improved on our Crossroads, which is our amateur radios. We've trained about another 50 people. They went through, we bought a bunch more equipment. We have established hubs throughout the whole valley in case of an earthquake or a large-scale event where communications are down, in which those ham radio operators go to certain locations and they report back us into the EOC. And then we've also had Fix the Bricks. Fix the Bricks is a huge program in which it's first of the kind in its nation, in which the federal government, FEMA, will pay 75% of retrofitting costs, and then the homeowner will have to pay 25% of the retrofit costs. For years, we've been working on that program kind of as a public information program, but this year was one of the first years where it actually became a real substantive program out in the field. And Audrey Pierce and Summer Meisner in our office worked very, very hard to get all that out. Right now, we have currently 7 homes that are completed that have went through the whole process, documented everything, and so they're done. So now those homes will hopefully, if we ever do have an earthquake, they will not collapse on top of their homeowners. So they've gone through that. We have currently right now about 21 contracts open and working through those. And then we have another 21 pending other documentation, in which we're going to go through, or actually it was 5 that have contracts open and 21 that are pending other documentation. So we'll get all those through. And we've also been awarded next year where we'll also have Fix the Bricks. We're hoping that this is going to be a 30-year program in which we can get all of our homes seismically retrofitted. For the new council members, the Fix the Bricks program isn't about making it so your house is going to be livable after the earthquake. It's about making sure it still stands and it's not going to collapse on people and cause more injuries or more fatalities. So this is a huge program because in the EOC, I usually run the Emergency Operations Center. If there's less people that I have to take care of after the incident that have not got hurt, that is huge, that is key. So we're hoping that this program will last another 30 years. We can continue getting funded by the federal government. We can get everybody's home in here seismically retrofitted. All right, and then we've also had Kenja's also been out, and she's greatly improved our footprint on our social media for both English, Spanish, and other language needs, pushing that out to all the public. And then we've been going around doing fairs. I'm sure you guys have seen Kenja out at your local fairs, going out there, really educating the public. We're trying not to get to the public too much where you have to do this. We're just trying to make sure that they have a kit and have a plan, and they know where to go in case of an emergency. So Kenja's been working great on that. I know in your guys' submittals, you guys wanted to talk about training and the training for city council. How we normally do the training for the city council is we kind of break you guys up into 3s or 1s individually. Right now, Robin in your office is working with our office to schedule some of those trainings, in which will come in and it takes about an hour, and it goes over through some of the stuff. Most of the stuff we could go through right here in council, but there's some stuff that is kind of sensitive in nature, like in a terrorist event where the council meets and those type of issues where we don't really necessarily want to push that out. But the majority of it can, but it is an hour, and you guys gave us like 20 minutes. There is one thing that we did do this year, though. We added another level of EOC activation, and that is monitoring. We learned from the flood events that we had on August 27th that sometimes the emergency management just needs to, usually it'll be me, we'll go to the command post or go to the dispatch to kind of get an idea on what needs to happen and make recommendations on unified command, or make recommendations if the EOC needs to be activated. We kind of find out that sometimes when department heads are in the middle of the fight, so you have police, fire, public services, public utilities, a lot of times they're focused on this, so we get brought in to kind of make sure that we're thinking of the whole picture. So that's why we kind of added the EOC monitoring level. The other thing I wanted to talk about, I know we did training with a majority of you guys last year, and we gave out vests to all you guys. Do all you guys still have all your vests? Okay. For the 2 new council members, we are going to order vests for you guys. We do ask if there is any type of event that you do call Cindy right away, to ask her, Cindy or Jennifer, to see what your guys' role and to see kind of what's going on. If at any time during an incident or event you guys need any kind of information from emergency management, you guys, the ones who have gone through training, do have contact box. You guys can call me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and ask and get a briefing from us on whatever you want. We are currently in the process, and hopefully you guys will enjoy this, of doing a checklist for you guys. So if there is an event, on what you guys do and how you guys operate in an event, because I know it's been kind of up to you guys on how everything's gone. Cindy asked us to come up with this checklist. The checklist is currently making its rounds through everybody getting comments. And at this training that we do, we will go over the checklist. I'll put it on your guys' phones. For the 2 new council members, I will update your wave, and for all the other new council, all the old council members, we'll make sure all your wave and your contact box and everything works, so you guys can go through all that. Any questions?
Contact box.
It's an app that we had. Remember when you guys came down, we did the training? It was a little app that has everybody's has contact lists for EM and everything. If you need me to do it again for you, you just go into your app store or your Play Store if you have an Android, and type in contact box, and it'll come up, and and it'll bring it up, and it'll have contact lists. If you have no contact lists, just call me, and I will text you over the contact lists. In those contact lists, they have everything from emergency management contacts to fire, police, public services, public utilities, or emergency contact information if you guys need those.
Okay.
Did I go too fast? I know we only had 20
You are
minutes.
pretty fast. Are you
I'm
done?
pretty fast. I am done, if you guys have any questions.
You have
I told you I'm
time.
fast.
Wow. Council members, do you have any questions for Eric? I do too. Every year I need another training.
Yeah, we will be doing that every January. We're trying to get that established every January. Another thing that probably the council needs to be aware of, every year the PSP is now going to make everybody go through a background check because of certain requirements that we have. So we're going to try to do that every January. If you guys need a copy of the background check forms, just ask me and I'll shoot you over a copy. They do have to be signed by a notary, and for reasons it is council member, and for reasons of getting a badge, you are a council member, and for areas that you need to access, just put public safety building in there, and then that way they'll go through if your guys' badges are getting expired.
Walkie-talkies, are we still supposed to have those?
No, we took back all your guys' radios,
Did you?
and we put Wave on all your guys' phones.
Did you know that, everyone? They took your
Yes.
walkie-talkies?
Yep.
I know. You
The-
don't have
a
all of them.
lot of these guys were
You
extremely
don't have them all,
happy.
Eric.
They were extremely
got
happy to take those
walkie-talkies.
radios. But what we ask is everybody to have
Okay.
Wave on their phones, and we can go over
Wave?
that in the training. Yeah, it's a program that allows you to turn your
Okay.
cell phone into a radio. And
Is that
then
an
if the
app
radio,
also?
that's an app also. Yes, it's Wave space 5.12. I'm going to go through this at the training
There
with
won't
you
be
guys.
an emergency before the training.
Yeah. If there is, we'll hopefully not. We'll make it work,
Man.
and we'll do those trainings. But yes, we'll have Wave, and then we have certain. What we do is we call it a PACE. We have a primary, alternate, contingent, and emergency means of communications, and how we go through all that, we'll go through on the training. So contingent is most likely going to be Wave, and emergent is always going to be you guys are showing up at the public safety building. So we'll go through all that at the training.
Councilmember Luke.
Yeah, I just want to say that that WAVE program is really, really helpful. When there was the active shooter situation up at the university, I was getting a lot of concerned texts and questions, and I listened to that app and was able to kind of keep up to speed with what was going on. So it's a very, very convenient tool that helps with immediate information. So.
And we do need to do something where not every emergency does not need to happen in your district. For some reason, that does happen.
I know. It's so true.
I know. It's just.
Councilmember Fowler.
Thank you. I was actually thinking about the Fix the Bricks program, which it sounds awesome. You mentioned that you were hoping for it to be a 30-year program. Is this all contingent just on federal funding and grants? Is that
Yes,
kind of
ma'am, it's a
what-
grant.
Okay.
Yep. It's the same grant that they used to do for the storm shelters down south. So we were the first jurisdiction that then took that and made it for, earthquake, seismic upgrading, so.
And
we're-
I saw in the briefing that there were about 600 interested people after you, sort of mentioned we were hoping for about 20 and we got 600 responses to that. Is there like a system in place or kind of like a priority in place as we continue to try to look at who gets into the program and who has to wait or things like that?
So this is Audrey Pierce. She is the program manager, and Summer Meisner, also in our office, also works in that. I will let Audrey handle those questions.
So the way we've managed it so far is that we have everybody register online, and that creates basically a waiting list for us. And we start at the beginning and we work our way down. So each time we have available federal funding or the grant opens for an application, then we start contacting the people down the list either, and we try multiple times to contact. We don't just skip over them and keep going to create the new list for the application for the year that we're in. And so we have over 1,000 people on the waiting list, but as far as people that we've either gone through or put into an application period, we're at like 300. So we're moving down through those people, but it's like we maintain them for about 6 months or so, and then the grant application opens, and then we'll like full speed ahead for about 6 months until we can't get anyone else on the list for that year. And then, but we try to send emails to those people, hey, we know you're still on the waiting list, you will maintain your spot on the waiting list, and you will move up into the queue the further we get down the list, kind of.
Cool. It sounds like a really neat program, so.
But as far as all of those houses on the list go, they aren't categorized in terms of the age of the home, or they're all the same. Doesn't
No,
matter.
we don't actually evaluate them till we're right before an application period. So the way that we can determine whether or not they'll qualify or not is to actually go out and do an evaluation of the home, and we'll take an engineer and an architect and we'll look through and we'll see if they meet all the guidelines. So until we actually get to that point, we don't actually know whether they can participate or not. So like you're saying, like, can we group them before we get to that? We do pull other county data and we can look at that, but it doesn't really give us a good idea until we can actually set foot in the house.
And then do you notify the homeowners after they've been evaluated whether or not they're going to continue toward funding?
Yep, so when the grant application for that period is done, all of those people that are in that grant are told that they're going to be funded as soon as we get in a grant award. And they're actually even told that, there's nothing we can do if we don't actually receive the award. But if that we do, that they are the ones that will receive the funding. It'll pass from us to them.
So if my house was evaluated, let's just say in May, and I never heard anything, that means that this house didn't qualify for funding.
Well, they would have heard something one way or the other.
But I didn't.
Because usually the engineer that
just
comes to the
saying.
house can tell them when we're at the house they didn't qualify. So if you didn't hear anything, you were either, it's a pretty fine line. If you didn't qualify, there's very few things that take a house off the list. Really, the main one we see is that people think they have a masonry house and they have a stick-built house. That's the main one that pulls them right off the list.
All right.
We'll
Other
check on
than
that for you.
but-
It's just a hypothetical.
Yeah, just a hypothetical.
Anyone else? All right, we're right on time.
I tried to hurry. I tried to get you guys back
I
on
could
time.
tell it was like a tsunami of information.
That's how I do
Just to
training,
stay in the vein of emergency situations. Thank you, both of you and your staff for being with us. Congratulations, John, on all the awards, and thanks for the work you do.
Thank you.
Thanks. And we'll see you at training soon,
Hopefully soon.
well before an emergency
Well before an
situation.
emergency. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. We're going to move on to item number 3, which is a fantastic courtesy informational update on the Fleet Block redevelopment. And this is a very early informational stage, so I want to thank Melissa Jensen, if you want to come up with us. I don't know if Lily, you're going to come up as well. Nick Tarbett from our office. Nick, you want to come up? You're on here. You don't have to. But thank you for this opportunity for us to hear early on the shape that your work is taking on this enormous piece of property.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the opportunity to have a chat about this as the most opportunistic, catalytic property in our city, as it's been called many times. I think it's such a unique opportunity to have an entire block to redevelop, which I think is why it has taken time and diligence to really make sure we have a path forward that's going to provide the best product for our city. So there you can see the block in its entirety. What you don't see is there is a little parcel that we don't own on that block, and it is in the southwest corner. So that's not blocked off, but just to give you a sense, because obviously adjacent owners are going to be key stakeholders in the development, I think it's important to note in that. So I think what I'd like to do is just, I'm new to the city, actually, right? I've only been here 2 years, which I still think is very new, and certainly new to my role. And so over that time, I've done some digging and worked with my team to kind of say, what has the history of Fleet Block been, and where are we now, and where are we going? And that's been a lot of the driving questions. Just to provide some context, this has before gone out for RFP under different administrations. It's been semi-tackled in different ways, and we have not yet found the clearest path forward in order to ensure sort of maximum benefit to our community. I think one of the things we don't take for granted is the opportunity, and in a way I think that may have stifled us in making sure that we do everything right to produce something that each one of us is going to be proud of who have any involvement in creating it. One of the main barriers over the history has been the environmental work. How bad is it? What is it? What can we do with it? And all of those questions. And we didn't have clear answers really until this year, and the council appropriated funding to allow us to really finish the environmental due diligence that was needed on this property so that we might have a better idea of how to move forward. So with that, as just part of the history, I'll actually have Lily just update you a little bit on the results of the environmental, because I think it can be helpful, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the path going forward.
Yeah, so over the course of 2017, we spent a lot of time digging into the environmental and conducted a huge amount of analysis of the site. It has been studied in great depth, and from that analysis, it was actually a very positive outcome of seeing a few things. One is that there are parts of the site that need very little remediation to move forward, particularly in the case of commercial, which has lower standards of cleanup. And then the other piece is that a lot of the work that does need to be done could be handled through the development itself, and that's usually a best practice in terms of development, is that the developer could actually meet a lot of what needs to be done in terms of soil excavation through their parking and through grading that's happening on the site anyway. So it was a very productive analysis and very fruitful in terms of seeing two, likely the future development would be phased. So what phases could make sense as being an initial phase that need a little less work? Where might we want to have open space as a way of dealing with some of the remediation? Where could commercial make sense? So that was a very successful evaluation, and it really gives a range of remediation options from if we just wanted to be very conservative and aggressive and clean up the whole site to residential standards, where would we be? If we want to defer that to the future developer, where would we be? And those are very different numbers, but gave us order of magnitude. So I think in your handout, the number that was given was really that most aggressive, conservative scenario, but likely the cost to the city would be much less. The other piece that we've spent some time digging into and needs further work is the other infrastructure barriers associated with the development of the Fleet Block, which could be a very substantial costs. And so those include roadway improvements, they include an evaluation of the transmission lines, and then some site utility costs as well.
So environmental and costs have been two of the main contemplative factors that we've considered as we've navigated a path forward. I would say another critical piece of this, and when the fleet block was really envisioned many years ago, so this is all hearsay, this was supposed to be the catalytic project for the Granary District. So if we think about our internal partners and working with the RDA, we've had conversations with Danny about what makes sense going forward and how we work together. I think there's really three pieces as we go forward that we'll work very closely on, and part of that is with the RDA development and what makes sense for participation and infrastructure. I know that there's lots of conversation about whether or not an extension is warranted, and so we will stay tuned into those conversations because it will certainly influence our path forward. And then economic development and housing. And so we're considering all of these pieces. I think when you start to branch out and you bring in all of the stakeholders, I mean, this is a city property, right? It belongs to the city, and we want to make sure that it does great things for the city. And so as we contemplate that and we think about all of the varying stakeholders, we have really wanted to lay a strong foundation that when we go out for disposition of this property, we know exactly what is feasible to ask for in terms of cost and what developer burden should be borne and sort of what we expect to happen there. And so that's been the path that we have moved forward on. I have a little more information on sort of the direction we're going over the next 9 months, but perhaps if there's any other questions right now about status or history, that now would be a good time to field those.
Oh, Councilmember Wharton.
I just have a question about disposition of large properties. So what is the policy that helps determine development or disposition of properties by hand?
Well, we follow ordinance, right? And so there's a disposition policy, and then there's, so the one that we followed in case of this, and I am turning to see if there's legal.
2.58, I think, is the ordinance number. It's for surplus property, so when properties are declared surplus.
Significant parcels as well, right?
Yes.
What's significant?
Significant.
There is a table of significant parcels, and I don't have it completely memorized, but one of them is public buildings would fall on that list. But that is the ordinance that directs us in our work. So periodically, department heads review their portfolio and identify if there are surplus properties. The fleet block has been, I'm not sure how long it's been vacant. I'm also fairly new to the city, but it's been vacant for a while, or the intention
don't
being,
remind us.
the intention being for ultimate disposition. And so that's the ordinance that we would refer to.
Lily, can I just?
Yeah.
No, go ahead, Chris, because I know Councilmember Luke has a question to follow up on with this too.
And do you think that the existing ordinance is adequate to address this issue going forward, or is there a need for more policy discussion, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's an interesting question. I mean, we use ordinance, obviously, to guide how we dispose of properties, and then obviously internally we have a process that we follow, an administrative process. I would say it's a policy decision in terms of what is merited and what isn't, and also I would lean on legal to kind of help us determine that.
Okay.
Councilmember Luke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Aaron alluded to this a little bit, but I've now been hearing updates for 6 years on what we can do and what we should be having on the fleet block. This council, this is the first time that this council makeup has heard this, but we've been talking about this for a long time. So what I hope is that this is going to be one of the last updates that we get, and that we can actually have something that is proposed so that we can look at and talk about. I do think that there has been a lot of discussion about what we as a council, what we as an RDA board have been interested in. This is a very, very unique opportunity that we need to get moving on immediately. And I know, and I appreciate the work that you're doing, because I know that, you know, we're now getting closer. But please, no more updates, and let's have, you know, something to actually talk about, because, you know, when I mentioned that this is a rare opportunity, I mean, we have a full, you know, just about a full city block on tracks in an RDA area. I mean, we don't have these kinds of opportunities, and it just baffles me that that as a city, and I know it's not you all, but as a city, we've been sitting on this for so long, and we've been talking about what to do, yet we continue to purchase, you know, existing properties for housing. We continue to do a lot of different things. You know, personally, I think that the discussion has been there. You know, what I think we've talked about, and if I'm wrong, please, you know, my colleagues correct me, but I think we're interested in seeing mixed use on that site. I think we want to see housing on that site. I think that, you know, if we need to look at density, if we need to look at if there are things that the current ordinance, that the current zoning doesn't fit with what you're anticipating, please let us know immediately, because I think we're ready to, at least I'll speak for myself, I'm ready to get moving on this, because it's been a long time coming, and I just want to see some action. So
Thank you for that. I am exactly of the same mind, so I appreciate the encouragement.
And the property will need to be rezoned. It is currently public lands, so for any future development, that is certainly going to come to you.
So what we've determined, perhaps I could talk about next steps going forward, might be a good segue based on Councilmember Luke's urgency, which I feel completely, believe me. It is such an opportunity. We have decided at this point to do an RFP for an urban design firm to come in and help us articulate the best, not the best vision. I don't want you to imagine like where the tree or the landscaping is, but the highest and best use in terms of phasing, infrastructure, and sort of zoning. And what we hope is that does a couple of things for us. One, it allows us to rely on experts throughout the nation to take a look at the block in relation to the larger Granary District and determine the best way to phase it so that we can ensure that development happens quickly. And that can also help our planning team sort of go through the zoning pieces. We understand we are resource constrained as it is, and so we look at this RFP as really providing us a very, very strong foundation so that when we go out to seek a developer or developers to build on the land, we have exactly a very clear idea of what to expect. What we expect, what the timeliness is, and how much we can expect a developer to take on. As I've looked back, I see the environmental and the cost have been the two inhibitors to this project getting done. And I think by going through this process, we'll be able to gain the information we need to provide a very strong foundation for moving quickly. So in one way, I'm actually disappointed because we're taking a little bit longer to seek this firm, but in another way, I feel like it provides some very concrete direction and cost analysis that we'll need to make the parcel productive. Anything you want to add on that?
I think that's a good synopsis. The only thing I would add is kind of the key piece for us and being able to move quickly with implementation of the ultimate developer RFP here is an understanding of what of the infrastructure costs can be borne by the private developer versus what needs to be borne by the public sector. And that's something where the economic feasibility is really critical to have a handle on before we put this out to RFP for development.
Council members? Councilmember Kitchen, and then Johnston.
What's your timeline for the RFP? When do you plan to release that?
We have a couple more reviews, so stakeholder reviews to review the RFP, and then it will go out. So last stage, so in the next 30 days.
Internal stakeholders is what you're
Yes.
referring to? Okay, so planning, RDA, engineering.
Yes, I hadn't considered engineering, but I think that makes sense. So yeah.
Okay, who else was on that list as far as stakeholders go?
For this RFP process, primarily planning RDA.
I see.
This is a preliminary piece, right? I mean, obviously, we have a much larger stakeholder group. As the design firm comes in, they will actually be charged with working with a variety of stakeholders throughout the city and the adjacent parcel. It's important that they're going to gather all of the information from the wide variety of partners to help navigate how we go forward.
And a follow-up to that for my colleagues here, I met with Melissa and Lily last week or 2 weeks ago about this in particular, and I encouraged them to think of the RFP in context of the whole neighborhood itself, not just this block. Now, I think it's important to have a plan for the 8.75 acres that is the Fleet block, but keep in mind that this is the beating heart of an entire RDA district, as Melissa mentioned already, and the RDA has some great tools that we could use to help develop this parcel. And so I really feel that we need to have a snapshot of this Fleet block in context of the broader neighborhood as well, and how we might roll out the development of other corners of the Granary District. So that's one thing that I think is really important here. And then just on a personal note, I would really like to see not one developer, but a cluster of developers getting their hands into this into whatever this project might look like. I think that when you have more than one style of development, you get a much higher quality development pattern in a neighborhood. And so, you know, I would like to just mention this to Nick Norris, who I see sitting in the audience as well. And I don't know what planning tools we have, but I really would love to see this block broken up. So, yeah.
Great. Councilmember Johnston, please.
Sure. I'm sorry I missed that meeting, by the way. Give me a sense of what I will see after this RFP goes out and the product comes back. Sort of having a hard time wrapping my head around. We alluded to it earlier with Chris and also with Derek about who sort of says the vision. What's the vision? What do we need? Do we need park? Do we need mixed use? Do we, what's the highest and best purpose, right? Economically, for a residential neighborhood, is that the sort of thing? Is that the scope of this? Give me a help what I'm looking for here. What my manage my expectations for me.
Let me talk about high-level vision, and then I'll have Lily speak to exactly what we're hoping to ascertain from this third-party consultant. It was really imagined as an innovation district, with the Fleet block being the catalyst of that area. Obviously, in innovation districts around the country, they're not contained to one block. They're much bigger than that. And so you would see a variety of actual uses, including housing, green space, public space, density, sustainable urban housing that provides that range of options of different sizes, proximity to arts, cultural venues, strong pedestrian connection, mid-block pathways, and then the businesses that would come in would reflect the idea of, you know, startups, innovation, some of that characteristics within the actual district, which is why obviously economic development is also a key player as we go forward in understanding from them what is actual feasible interest versus interest. We know that there's a lot of interest in the Fleet block, but some of that interest is very in line with the vision and the master plans, because this is also informed by the master plans, and some of it's not. So that's sort of big picture vision, and then I'll have Lily speak to the RFP.
Yeah, so the RFP definitely is not about the vision, because there is a vision, and the downtown master plan provides a lot of the concepts that we want to see here. There's several deliverables that we're anticipating through the context of this RFP. I think the important initial tasks are really a distillation of what the studies that have been done on the site and internal and external stakeholder feedback, which are both critical, and using that to inform the highest and best use plan for the site, which is really looking at a few things. Ultimately, we want to end up with a plan for the site that has recommendations on phasing, what can move forward as an initial phase, what would be later phases, the appropriate mix of uses for each of those phases in putting them out for development, the infrastructure costs associated with that, and how what could be paid for by private development versus public. Okay, go ahead.
Can I just offer like a very tactical example of this so that you can understand what well, everybody can, because we're speaking very jargoning a little bit. But the power lines are a big issue. A lot of people have said, you need to bury the power lines. Well, that probably is the single largest cost of that block, is to bury those. And then are you just burying one section of that whole power line? And how does that look? And so we know that there are ways that you can build around power lines, and that might be the best approach. And so this consultant would come in, they would work with our fire department, they would look at other examples around the country of how power lines have been avoided via setback or whatever was needed in order to still get the density or the desire of the project without incurring the additional cost. Or vice versa, saying if you really want to achieve this, you're going to need to bury those, and this is how much of that burden that a developer should take on, for example.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, the goal would be to have a very clear implementation plan that we could work with to kick off the initial phase through a developer RFP, which would be the mix of uses, the density scenario, and the costs associated with enabling that development and how they would be borne.
One other question, Madam Chair, if I may.
Please, go ahead.
What's this current status with the other property owners? Is there two or one owner as well?
There's one adjacent property
Just
owner.
one. And there's some environmental remediation, I'm guessing, on that side as well. But they're responsible for that, or are they looking to join with anything the city's doing? How far along is that?
I think they're certainly interested in participating. They've been great to work with. They've shared their environmental studies. They're interested in the site at large. I think obviously we are very sensitive to the public process that needs to take place and ensuring that we provide an opportunity for a wide range of developers to engage in that. And so while we see them as a stakeholder in terms of how it would develop, and really key, I mean, if anything is developed, we want to make sure that adjacent property is going to help move that forward. And I know that they've been really willing and cooperative in our vision and want to make sure that it goes through the right processes and steps as well.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Fowler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, and you may have answered this, and I may have missed it, but do we expect this sort of consultation and this study of how we're going to get to an implementation plan to take the majority of the year? When do you anticipate, fingers crossed, all the good things bearing down nicely on us, that we would have an implementation plan?
We are assuming that if we're able to get this out in the next 30 days, that we would have a final report that's been vetted by the stakeholders in the fall.
Okay.
That's our estimate right now.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rogers?
I guess my question is, I know that for a rezone of a property, it takes what, Nick, 8 to 12 months? Nick, is it about right? 8 to 12 months for a rezone?
Yes, generously. Probably, I don't want to speak for planning, but probably closer to 10,
Yeah.
realistically.
So,
Like
I mean,
this.
10 months down the road, do we have any idea? I mean, are we looking at a mixed-use development here? Is that something that we could start off immediately to get the rezone done?
Initially, and Nick is welcome to join us, it was contemplated as a form-based zone, and so I'll let him speak to that.
Yeah,
And
great.
can I, before you answer, in the flyer we have, it talks about mid-scale, but it also talks about high density, and I wondered what, that's kind of, don't want to say
So-
contradicting each other, but it's not very clear to me.
From a zoning perspective, we actually internally have an ordinance written for it. We have not, it has not gone through a vetting process. It's just an outline. We started writing in numbers based on what the master plan says, based on previous engagement. I mean, and there's been a lot of, over the past 3 or 4 years, a lot of public engagement in this area about this development.
Nick, can we bring the mic up a little bit?
Sorry. And so, yeah, we do contemplate an extension of a more intense form-based district than what exists in Central Ninth. It's kind of a step up for there. the difference between, and just to maybe clarify the idea between density and scale. So density really, in our mind, is talking about the residential units and the number, whereas the scale is talking about the overall size of the building. You can get randomly different densities, even at small scale, depending on footprints and all those things. So that's kind of the difference there. Once we like to use the term density and intensity. So those are two different kinds of things, but they're related. Hopefully that helps explain that.
Yeah, Councilmember Fowler?
So just to clarify, you could, what you mean, like the difference there is you could have a 50-story building with 50 units because they're all one floor, or a 50-story building with, 1,500 units. And that's the difference between density and scale. Is that layman's terms accurate?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rogers, were you done?
My point is just, I know that it's a vetting process, right, trying to figure out the way you're going to go, and I just want to streamline the process as fast as possible. So, and when the RFP is done, selection's done, we're already in the process of helping that developer through.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, like I said, I mean, we're pretty ready to go. I mean, we have an existing ordinance. It's all about deciding what that height is, things like that, and then starting to run it through a process. One of the things that we want to do is make sure that that ordinance is transferable to the rest of the district. So that's the part that once we get those, then we want to make sure that we're not doing it. I mean, fortunately, we don't. This is an area where we have a lot of big buildings, not tall buildings, but a lot of big buildings. And so scale isn't necessarily as a big of a concern as it was, say, east of 300 West, obviously. So there's more flexibility there, but we still want to make sure that we're getting that number right and that it's feasible.
I have a question.
Councilmember Kitchen.
Melissa, has Housing and Neighborhood Development ever seen through a development of this size on this large of a parcel before?
I don't know if I can answer that.
That
just
you're
being-
aware of in the history
No.
of the Housing and Neighborhood Development Division? No.
But again, I looked at it.
I know it's a big question, but I'm just thinking like this I can't help but think about this in context of the redevelopment project area. And
I think the closest comparison actually is probably like the Granary District, where the RDA has assembled a number of parcels that probably come close to the scale of this size of a parcel. But to my memory, the city hasn't had a full city block to dispose of. I don't know. Ever. That's always scary
Not
to
just-
say ever.
not just
but Yeah,
hand,
not
yeah.
in recent memory. So.
okay, thank you.
Any other council member questions? I have a few, but I'll wait. So going back to the Councilmember Wharton's question around what ordinance and policy might help shape the direction of this approach, and that we have the surplus ordinance, but I think one of the qualifying acreage requirements to become surplus is like an 1/8, 20th of this site. We have 7.5 acres that we have here. And as we were just saying, it's so unique. And so I'm wondering if there isn't some more intense scrutiny necessary on what, for example, we're talking about some pretty big ticket items, undergrounding being the biggest of those. What kind of considerations are being given to the reality of budgets? And it sounds like you're going to be coming back to us asking for money. And we've already had some hot conversations on other undergrounding very nearby here. So, these are really sensitive issues that I don't feel like I have a lot of direction yet of what you're considering in your process.
I think one of my goals for housing and neighborhood development, and in particular when we think about properties that we are charged with and how we dispose of them. And one of the things that I think is key is making sure that everybody understands where we're at in the process and how we're moving forward. And so as we go out to conduct this study, my hope is that when we get the results of that, we come back to this body to have a further discussion about next steps before any sort of RFQ or developer strategy is executed. And I think that's really important because also, as we know, I'm new. Mike Ackerlow was before me, and I hope that I'm here through the fruition of Fleet Block. But if it's not, I think it's really important to have specific steps in the process where it's been laid out and heard and sort of recognized as we go forward so that we can keep the momentum of such properties going forward. So I wouldn't see our next step as an ask, but more of a presentation of the results and a path forward.
Well, then let me get a little more specific with a request here, which is that I'll back up to say that there are sometimes accidentally assumptions made by third-party contractors that we bring in to evaluate an area or a property or potential project. And there are assumptions made that don't fit into the reality of our budget context. And I recognize right now there's really no money on Fleet Block to even begin the conversation, but that is the reality. So if I could request that this third party be oriented to the current landscape of funding in the RDA area, or the lack of funding in the RDA area with public utilities, perhaps even with the discussions that this body had in the RDA capacity around undergrounding, because it would be a shame for us to get results back that assume a willingness or revenue that isn't there.
Aaron, something in addition to that is also to have them look at maybe other ways of remediating, whether it's source remediation instead of doing the entire remediation of the property. I mean, I don't know if that's something the city's ever looked at, but there are other ways of remediating properties I don't think we've looked at. So.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and Councilmember Rogers. We will add those components.
I wondered if there are similar developments around the country that maybe are inspiring when you look at this. Is it too early to say?
We looked at several innovation districts throughout the country for inspiration for this area. And I don't have them in front of me, so I apologize for that. But I can certainly send some additional information your way in terms of how we came to this sort of decision.
I think I'd be interested in that, maybe in the... Yeah.
Sure.
I don't know
Yep.
if you couldn't hear Councilmember Kitchen, perhaps a reorientation to what an innovation district is, especially one limited to the size that we're talking about here. Some of us went on the Chicago Chamber trip and visited, tell me the name of the year. There's a giant, the old Sears Roebuck warehouse building. It's enormous, and they have an incredible innovation center in there. It's very difficult to say, yeah, we could translate that to this empty block that we have. So I'll wrap up by asking also that I'm assuming that the Transit Master Plan would be part of the context that our third parties look at, and the potential, although albeit distant potential, for a 9th South off-ramp reorientation, which we're in the study process now. I understand Transportation's begun the study that the council funded some time ago on use of that off-ramp, but that area is distantly has the potential for a serious transportation impact or reorientation there. So I hope that Transportation might be asked to give feedback on that. So I've got Councilmember Kitchen asking for some neighborhood context in consideration of the RFP at more of a holistic level, with a preference for multiple developers and a piecing out of the parcels. Councilmember Johnston asking for collaboration with the neighboring property owner, and if we could get some follow-up on that at whatever next meeting we have on this subject. Sure. About that potential collaboration for the environmental cleanup. Councilmember Fowler asking for the timeline of completion of that third party, if you could just let us know in whatever written briefing or emails as this goes along, that would be really helpful. And Councilmember Rogers asking, which I will echo, what kind of streamlining can we do in this process? I think it's going to come down to money, and it's going to come probably to a rezone. So whatever those really foreseeable conversations are, let's begin them soon so that this can be developed before we die. Council members, any other points, questions you want to bring up on this one? Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to see where you're at in the process and have a little bit of dialogue about it. It's been a while in both ways since we've talked about it and how long this has been going on. So we hope that this kind of dialogue can continue as your process does.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Council members, how you doing? You need a break? You all right? We'll get through the next one, and then maybe we have a break scheduled, but we're running a little behind. So let's move on to item number 4, an ordinance for street closure at 13th South between 900 West and the Jordan River. And we've got Brian Fulmer from our council staff who will join us. But I see some other people. Come on up.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
We're pulling up the image here. We're talking about, as you mentioned, a street closure at 1300 South between 900 West and the Jordan River. And if it's all right with you, I'd like to maybe spend just a minute giving a brief background on it to refresh council members' memory and bring the new council members up to speed a little bit on this. Is that all right, Madam Chair?
Please do, and please introduce yourselves as you go along for the public's sake. Thank you.
This section of 1300 South is approximately 60 feet wide and 180 feet long between 900 West and the Jordan River. It's not currently used for transportation of vehicles, but more for parking of vehicles and illegal dumping of items into the Jordan River. Part of the project associated with this is, or this is part of a project called the Three Creeks Confluence, where the Immigration, Red Butte, and Parley's Creeks all come together as they enter the Jordan River. There's a plan to develop an open space here and make it a nice public area for learning about and spending time at the Jordan River. In the summer of 2016, the council was briefed on this street closure, and at the subsequent public hearing, the adjacent property owner to the south expressed concern about impacts to his business. It's an auto repair shop, and as part of that, he has a towing operation that comprises a significant portion of the revenue generated by his business. He needs space to move his tow truck with the vehicles he's picked up into the storage yard at the back of his lot. If we go to the next slide, we'll have you'll see the green shaded area and the pink shaded area actually is the storage yard. The owner uses a section of 13th South as an entrance to his business to move the tow truck in and drop off the vehicles that he's towed. Since that time, there have been meetings between the administration and some council staff with the property owner on site, and also additional meetings the administration has had with him to talk about purchasing or trading property. And so where we are today is to present some options the administration has come up with while working with the property owner. With that, I'll turn it over to Louis Kogan.
Great. Thank you very much. Madam Chair, council members, I'm Louis Kogan, and I am the program manager for Salt Lake City's Open Space Lands program. We have presented 3 options here in front of you. that we feel like are sort of three different ways we could go with this project. The first, as Brian said, is and is the option that we are recommending, and I believe is the option up there right now, would be that we vacate this public right-of-way and convert it in its entirety to a public parcel, but that we lease temporarily a 17.5-foot wide by 112 foot long access to the adjacent auto shop to the south for access. The second option, could we, I think that's on, oh, we don't have a second option. Okay, never mind, okay. The second option is essentially to shrink that access width down to 10 feet. That is what was requested by the property owner. We looked into that option. It would have slightly less impact on our proposed open space improvement project, but unfortunately requires the relocation of a single power pole because of requirements about vehicle proximity to power poles. And because it's a distribution power pole, we have to relocate 2 adjacent power poles, bringing the total cost for the power pole relocation to at least $250,000. So staff is not recommending that option. A third option, and the one that would allow our open space enhancement project at Three Creeks to proceed as designed, would be to simply vacate the right-of-way and not provide any sort of lease to the adjoining property owner for access. We have decided to recommend the first option, providing a temporary lease of a 17.5-foot wide access, because we feel that that will adequately mitigate any impact on the adjoining property owner, and will allow us to proceed quickly with the project. We do have about $528,000 in CDBG funds that we've been sitting on for a while we we're hoping to resolve this vacation, and we have been advised that we really need to show that we are starting to spend those monies by actually March of this year in order to avoid risk losing those funds. There will be some impact on the proposed project by providing a 17.5-foot wide temporary right-of-way, access to the Jordan River along the south side of the Three Creeks will be impacted substantially, either limited or not viable. And there may be some impacts to our ability to fully daylight the box culvert that is under the 13th South right-of-way.
Great. Planning, do you have anything you want to chime in with yet? Council members, we've got 3 options before us. What kind of questions, discussion? Councilmember Fowler, please.
Madam Chairperson, so this is a temporary lease, correct? What would be the anticipated time? How would that be structured? A year lease, year-by-year lease? What would we be expecting, if you have any idea to that?
I have to be honest, I haven't discussed it in depth with planning or real estate services. I know that, at least from the conversations I've had internally at Parks and Public Lands, we're motivated to attempt to relocate the property owner. Obviously, that is up to him and not up to us. But being able to expand the project boundaries a little more would be extremely beneficial. In our meetings with the property owner, he's indicated that he had agreed to work collaboratively with the city to try to find opportunities to relocate his business. I think that our challenges are, we need to find the funding to relocate him and also find a good comparable property. And I suspect that those things are going to take a number of years. So if I'm just guessing, I think we might negotiate or attempt to negotiate something along the line of 5 years.
May I follow up, Madam Chair? How long do you, two questions then. Number one would be, how long would you anticipate this project to take? And then with that, let's say in 5 years, the funding has appeared magically somewhere, and there's a wonderful spot for Mr. Vu to move to. Can we then expand that to kind of create what we're envisioning here that we may not be able to create should we give this temporary lease?
I think that the options for that are very good. To answer your first question, I believe that full implementation of this project will take about 2 years. While there may be some impact to our ability to daylight the culverts, in recent conversations with our project consultant, they believe that providing this 17.5-foot right-of-way, pending some additional geotechnical work, that we will be able to substantially daylight the culverts, and that the primary impact would be on public access to the riverbank south of 13th. Because of that, I do think that were we able to relocate Mr. Vu in the future, I think it would actually be relatively simple to expand the project area without having to go back and rework this part of the project.
Councilmember Kitchen, then Johnston.
Have you guys done an assessment on how much it might cost to relocate Mr. Vu?
I know that Real Estate Services has initiated an appraisal. I don't believe that appraisal is complete. I know that about 4 years ago, my predecessor had made an offer to Mr. Vu based on his tax assessor's assessed value of the property that was not sufficient to interest him. But in conversations about a month ago with Real Estate Services, I think that realistic fair market value assessment of his property probably would be sufficient to interest him in relocating, given that there was some additional compensation necessary to make it feasible for him to establish his business at a new location.
Have you imagined what we might be able to do with this project if we retained that property that he currently holds? Like, could we expand the scope of this project, for instance?
Certainly. Yes, I think that options for use of the water coming out of the Three Creeks in that area are relatively limited because of the proximity to the river and the relatively low grade of and depth of the culverts there. So I think getting water up onto this property would be difficult, but I think just expansion of park or plaza space at that location, potentially facilitating better boat ramp or fishing dock amenities, and there even has been some discussion of some sort of public-facing facility there that might house several staff or some sort of interpretive center.
My understanding is that by going with option A, we would not be able to fully see the Confluence project realized in its entirety. Even though it's a temporary lease, it feels like a permanent lease to me. And I don't know, it just seems like an opportunity for us. So I'm actually leaning toward option C here, and maybe looking at finding ways that we can move forward with relocating, and maybe, I don't know, I would like to find out some more information on what it might cost, for instance, but to me, it just seems like, you know, this reaches into master plans dating all the way back to 1990 and even before. So I just feel like we should look at this a little bit more holistically. And so I'd love to hear what Councilmember Johnston thinks. This is his district after all. But I'm leaning toward option C at the moment.
Cindy had some feedback on that one. Do you mind, Andrew?
Just a clarification, because I think things are evolving as you receive more information. Were you saying a minute ago, I may have misunderstood, but did you say that you could complete the whole project in terms of the daylighting and things, even with an easement. And can you describe that more for us? What would be lacking? What would you not be able to do? You may have already said that, but if you could clarify.
Sure, and I might turn attention to the image up there on the screen. I think that what we are concerned about is that if we provide this temporary access easement, it would potentially substantially impacts our ability to do anything that is on the south side of that, what is shown as the daylighted stream up there. So right now, we're showing public access to the city-owned portion of the Jordan River to the south. We're showing a fishing dock and or fishing terraces, and then an ability for people to get right down to the river's edge. I think it's possible that all that would be impacted. I don't want to say that it would not be possible, and it may in fact be possible to attempt to share the right-of-way, depending on what we're able to negotiate with the property owner, so that the public has access along the same place where Mr. Vu would be backing his vehicles.
Just to clarify, it will be pretty easy to negotiate with the property owner because you have all of the cards. So the city owns the property. You may choose, or the city may choose to give him some ability to use it, but in terms of the requirements associated with that and how you would lay that out, that really is up to the city, isn't it?
I suppose that is true, but I might confirm that with my planning colleagues.
Well, it's a shift from what's in our transmittal too, which says that if we don't go with option, or that if we allow option A or B, then the south side is inaccessible to the public. But you're saying it might not be inaccessible to the public.
I think we have been trying to avoid getting ahead of ourselves in paying our consultant to initiate detailed plans here until we knew what the city council would or would not approve as far as vacation of this right-of-way. And so I guess we've not really gone down that path completely. I think that if we provide the property owner with that access, we're going to need to try to determine at that point what is still feasible. I have not been advised by any other staff exactly what the negotiation process looks like. I absolutely hear what you're saying, but this is not something I've ever conducted before.
Well, I'll just say that it is difficult for the council to make a decision about which path, especially when the administration's made a recommendation on A and said these are the consequences of that decision. For us to hear that they may not be the consequences of the decision, and that's still a fluid scenario. It puts us in a really squishy position to make a decision. So Councilmember Johnston, sorry to delay your moment.
It's all right. I'm not interested in harming the business in any way, Mr. Vu and his business. However, I want to be clear on my position here that the 13th South right-of-way has been city-owned property forever, essentially, right? I mean, as far back as we know, there hasn't been permission to use it. So using it to do the existing business and relying on that easement without having legal access to it for a long time is sort of the foundation of this. And doing a temporary lease is frustrating for me because there's no end result here other than saying there's a temporary lease to remain in business there, which may or may not be compatible with the park next door anyway. And it seems like it does change fundamentally the whole design process. It's been going through with Glendale Community Council and that open house for a couple of years now, saying this is the design, this is what we need. And saying one easement is, well, one option is, no, this is city-owned property as part of a master plan for a park. we can do the option C. The second one was a smaller one, a 10-foot one, but then why would it be the city's responsibility to pay for power pole realignment if the property, the business wants to use that, and therefore they should be responsible? Is that accurate?
I don't think exactly, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is not exactly city-owned property. It is a public right-of-way.
Okay.
It is not yet a parcel of city-owned property. Is that correct? And I believe that there are state statutes which dictate what we, when we can and cannot vacate public right-of-way. And so what I'm trying to be careful and not misspeak here, but I believe that there are some requirements where we cannot, while it's a public right-of-way, it is not a city parcel yet. We are proposing that we vacate this right-of-way and turn it into a city parcel, but there is a property owner who has historically been using a public right-of-way for beneficial use of his property, and we're trying to be cognizant of that in the same way that, if this was a residence and this was the resident's only access to their garage or something, we would not, we might think twice before.
Louis, that's true of 13th South, but there is existing encroachment on the west side abutting basically the river bend there. Councilmember Wharton, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah. I'm just wondering, this doesn't seem to be proper use of a public right-of-way either. Because if the truck is required to be parked in the right-of-way, aren't they blocking the right-of-way for the rest of the public? So.
Yeah, maybe I think I need to clarify a little bit what's been happening on 1300 South.
Yes.
I believe the property owner has been using it for two things. One, and that's legal access to his property. Essentially what this property is now is a corner lot that has two different access ways. The other issue, though, is that, it's my understanding, the property owner has been using the property as essentially parking for his own business. Now, that is something that's not authorized. So I just kind of wanted to clarify that in your statement, council member, on what the property has been used for, and actually accessing his property is illegal use of that, but parking and using it for storage of vehicles has not been an authorized use.
So I think the second thing is there's not an official response back from Glendale Community Council, as I understand it. Is that accurate? There's been a lot of open houses and discussion, but not an official response back on this particular issue. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. The city council, more recently than they were, reached out to.
Community council?
I'm sorry, the community council, thank you. Or members of that have participated in this process, but we have not received a formal response.
Sure.
Councilmember Fowler? Oh, Andrew, I'm
So
sorry. you're
if
not
they
done.
wanted to do that 10-foot easement, you're saying that it'd be a $250,000 relocation cost for power lines. Is that accurate? Somewhere in there? But who's responsible for that then, if it's a...
My understanding as we have moved forward here is that we were not holding all the cards, and that we had to make a substantial effort to make sure that the adjoining property owner was not substantially impacted, and that has been our approach moving forward here. Was not that the city was holding all the cards with the right-of-way. So my understanding has been that the city would foot the bill on the pole relocation, if that was the approach we took.
Just to clarify too, I believe option A does not require relocation of the power.
No, the option B, I believe,
Option B,
right?
Okay.
That's what the property owner asked for, was option B essentially, but the power line readjustment would be cost prohibitive. To whom, though? Is to the city? Is that our understanding? So
That's my current understanding.
Okay.
Could we ask Paul to come up from the city attorney's office, just because we're having a lot of guessing on our end about
Sorry, I don't.
right away.
I didn't mean to boot anybody.
And then I want to turn it over to Councilmember Fowler, who has some questions.
We just wanted to clarify an issue about city-owned property versus public right-of-way. It's really one of the same. The city owns that right-of-way, so in order to
But
clarify
will you
any.
pull that mic up
Sure.
and rockstar that?
I know. I
Thanks.
have to do that myself to people, so. I don't know if the council heard, but public right-of-way is city-owned property. To the extent that makes any difference.
That
We
was
just
my-
wanted to clarify so that.
That was my question again, is that it's public right-of-way, but it's city-owned property essentially. Now, we can change the access and use of it by statute, but it is technically city-owned property. So that's why my confusion about why we would be responsible for relocation of power lines or anything else if there's a request for an easement or use of part of that.
And wouldn't we have to do a public benefit analysis because we
If
would
we're doing
be-
that to benefit the property owner.
Exactly.
Most likely, that's something I think we need to look into.
And that's not going to cost justify, I'm guessing.
So that's my question, is that if we're probably picking a deadline for spending money to actually get this implemented, it sounds like. And I hate to sort of make these decisions in a rush, right? Crisis kind of decision-making. But I'm troubled by us feeling like we're hemmed in here. And like I said, I don't want to put unintentional burden on Mr. Vu and his business. However, it does substantially change the entire design of this plaza, essentially, this access to the river, and I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about us feeling like we are trapped to make a decision based on urgency and spending money, and also feeling like we're responsible for some of these costs for some sort of mutual decision, right, and sharing that easement. But
I'm going to give it back to Councilmember Fowler, who has questions along these lines.
So you sort of answered my access question, but actually, should we decide on option A? Can't we create a finite temporary lease where it would be only last for 2 years, and then that would have to be like you either stay or we take this away? I mean, there's seems to me some legal negotiations within a lease of some sort that we could work with as well.
To the extent that you're asking me that question, I apologize. It would be more helpful if we had some folks here from Real Estate Services to answer these questions. I have not been involved in any of these conversations. I merely was part of the process of getting the street closure from Planning Commission to here, so I know that's not very helpful.
Councilmember Wharton?
So when were we hoping to break ground on this park?
If we were able to move forward this spring with the construction documents, probably this fall.
Okay, so, and what's the thinking behind negotiating, this is kind of what Council Member Fowler asked of 7 years? Why would we go that far out?
I don't want to say exactly a certain period of years. I feel like in order to minimize impact on the business to the south, they would need to be relocated by the time that their temporary access was closed. And relocating them requires the funding to acquire the relocation parcel, as well as some money to make it feasible for them to restart their business in a new location. We don't necessarily have that money right now, nor have we identified a specific property where they could be relocated.
Well, I'm just a little bit confused because I don't understand why, why would we be paying to relocate the business? Because we're not taking any of their actual property. So there's no takings issue.
If at this stage, we don't need to pay to relocate the business. However, if we want to acquire the property where they are now, from them.
But there's been an understanding that the towing operation is integral to the success of the continuation of this business, and that if we do take even what is rightfully the city's, it will eliminate their ability to operate the towing component of their business and doom the business according to the business owner, right?
That's correct.
But, okay. And you've been down to the property. Have you, seeing it, there's no other way to make this towing thing work? What about the property to the south of that property? Like, it looks like there's stuff there. So these are okay. Okay, thank you.
We could come back.
Okay.
Councilmember Fowler wanted to jump back in. No, this is good.
else. But just real quick, going back to something that Chris mentioned, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but it's back. So there's part of the haste in this is that there's the CBD funding that has the potential of going away and losing, how much did you mention, $580,000?
$528,000.
$28,000 specifically for this project. And unless we show some sort of construction, my understanding is by March or somewhere around then we have the potential of losing that funding.
That's correct. Our budget with that money includes about $80,000 for the preparation of various things that, aside from breaking ground, and we could start spending that money immediately, which per direction from hand on CDBG, that would probably be sufficient to show that we are making progress and spending the money.
So as a follow-up to that, we wouldn't necessarily have to make this decision in the next couple of weeks for you to start moving forward on a project or start at least spending that money so that it's not lost.
That is true. We feel like if we need to be able to tell our consultant what the boundaries of the project are, and because it's located, almost directly over these box culverts where there would be daylighting activities, the 17.5 feet is. It's important to know if we're going to have that or not as they start preparing the construction documents.
Sure. And I understand that. I think part of the concern, and I certainly don't want to speak for Councilmember Johnston, but it seems like we're being asked to make a decision in haste or lose a bunch of money, and that seems like if there is a way to have some more information on this without the possibility of losing a very significant amount of money for this project, I would certainly feel more comfortable with that. And I think that was something that Andrew was getting to earlier, is this seems like we're trying to make a critical decision and there's still so many answers or questions left unanswered. And again, so that's my concern. If there's a way to kind of prolong a little bit without the worry of losing this very substantial amount of money for this project.
So we're going to go to Councilmember Kitchen, but I just want to synopsis at this moment that this body does make CDBG funding decisions. We could decide, straw poll, to reallocate this money if that's something that we feel like we need more information, because the information in the briefing right now is different from the information in the transmittal. And I think that there may be some need for real estate services to be at the table with us and be more open about, clearly we're hearing that you're motivated. I'm not sure that the property owner's motivated, and there are tools that I'd like us to talk about in a second. But so at this point, let us not be under the axe of CDBG disappearing when we're the ones who make CDBG decisions. Councilmember Kitchen.
Thank you for that point, Erin. And I completely agree with everything that you mentioned, Councilmember Fowler. I'm looking at this map here, and to me, the property in question, the private property here, seems like a natural spot for a continuation of a Jordan River Parkway park. And so I guess, I don't want to get into the weeds any more than we already are on this issue, but what I would like is for the administration to come back with some additional information on what they might consider when it comes to acquiring this property, and whether, you know, what the vision for it might be, whether it's a public park or some sort of facility that you mentioned, Louis. I would love to see us fulfill a larger vision for public space here and not have a towing company or a car shop right up against the park. You know, I just see an opportunity here. So let's maybe think a little bit bigger and come back to at least this body with some options for how we might be able to, if we wanted to prioritize additional funding, for instance.
Great. Councilmember Johnston?
Yeah, maybe in your synopsis piece, I think I would be, I want to be clear that I would only endorse, I think at this point, some compromise or some agreement that would not narrow the scope of the park at this point. And the reason I say that is because the point of this was the Three Creeks confluence and daylighting. That was the whole park. And the culvert being directly underneath 13 South means that any encroachment upon that fundamentally changes that. I don't know the specifics on that, obviously, and the consultant and so forth would have to look at that, but it does compromise the point of the park, I think. And that's my concern about the easement over 13 South at this point. I'd love to see if there are plans or other ideas about how a mutually beneficial agreement comes with Mr. Vu, where the relocation and the city looking at that piece of property south of it. My concern about two of these options is just that it does, I think, change the nature of that development, that park. And so I'd be disinclined to agree to those at this point. So
I think if I can summarize a bit, it sounds like you've got a body who is mostly on the side of we want this project to continue as planned to this point. And I like the way Councilmember Kitchen put it, that we're doing a temporary lease that could permanently impact the development of the confluence. And that feels wrong. I don't feel like the property owner is as motivated as the city is to find new property. And so what I would propose is that we look at strengthening the incentives to get this moving. And part of that is our ability to put a shorter time span on that temporary lease. And perhaps if it's a 2-year construction horizon on the project, perhaps it's a 2-year lease that we're looking at here, but that couldn't we contemplate the revolving loan fund as a financing tool for Mr. Vu in building a new facility? My memory of his addressing us at the public comment back in the summer was that he wanted to be on 9th East or 9th West and to have another garage facility, appropriate facility. And I remember at the time that administrative folks basically said, we don't build garages. Salt Lake City doesn't go building garages, but we do have financing tools. And so I'd like to hear back from the real estate services if they've explored making the revolving loan fund a financing option for Mr. Vu. And I wonder, I know Cindy's walking away, but I wonder if a straw poll or if it would be helpful. Yes? Okay, then can I propose a straw? Am I allowed to propose straw polls? All right.
I'll propose a straw poll.
You know what? Can you read my mind?
I think so. What we would like to do is we would like to move forward with the project and not impact or alter the design of what has been approved for the project. And we would ask that the administration look for ways to further incentivize the relocation of this space and what the space could be used for. That's our inclination at this point. Did I get everything?
Yes, I'm just wondering if we're inadvertently tying the hands of real estate services in any way, or maybe we could just include in our straw poll our intention to allow Mr. Vu's business to succeed and
Yes.
continue in the area.
Yeah.
I think do we share that intention? I don't know. I guess you.
Sort of, well, I want to make sure it's clear enough for everybody that we can actually operationalize it. I think my intention was not to change the park itself. Now, I don't know the solution for Mr. Vu and the business. I think that's something that I would defer to folks working with him on. I think the intention might be to not, to help his business succeed in the place that would be most feasible. Because obviously if we don't give the easement, it's not going to succeed there the way he envisions it, right? That's where it sort of intentionally moves the
No,
process along a little bit.
We should leave Chris's straw poll as is and forget my attempt to friendly amend it. Okay.
Yes.
Is that straw poll clear? All those in favor of maintaining the design as is, as Chris stated, and moving ahead with negotiations and feedback from the administration? That's all in favor with Councilmember Rogers away. Does that help give you some direction?
That absolutely does. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, council members.
We definitely need some clarity on what the implications of the options, specifically the option the administration has recommended to us, what those consequences entail.
I understand, and I think that with the direction of your straw poll, we can direct our consultant to move forward far enough to give us that clarity.
Great. Anything else, council members? Great discussion on that one. Thank you. And thank you, Tracy and Lewis and Brian, for your time.
Thank you very much.
Item number 5 is an ordinance. Actually, council members, do you need a break?
Sure, I'll take
We have one scheduled 5 minutes ago, so let's take one now. We'll come back to item 5 with the text amendment for temporary use chapter, and we will be back. Can we be back here at 4:30? That'd put us right on time. Thanks. Thank you.
Means I can leave, right?
Yeah. Okay, we're moving on to item 5, which is the ordinance looking at text amendment to the temporary uses chapter 21A.42. That's in the city zoning code, of course. We've got Nick Tarbett, Nick Norris, Wayne Mills, and Chris Lee perhaps joining us. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Nick, do you want to kick us off?
If it's all right with you, we'll just let Chris take it over from here. This was an item that we put on pretty quickly without a lot of staff analysis, so he's best to speak to it.
Great.
All right. Thank you, Nick. This is regarding Chapter 21A.42, the zoning, or the temporary use section. And this is in regards to a petition that was initiated by Mayor Biskupski in April of 2017, basically to amend this chapter to streamline it and make it more simple for people to use. Temporary uses has caused a little bit of confusion and problems with people downstairs getting permits to follow through with that. So out of that, this is what we've been working on. As it's mentioned in my staff report, the major issues that we're looking at proposing to change are, the first is separating temporary uses from temporary structures. In the existing ordinance, they're tied in together, and it makes it very confusing what the difference is between a temporary use and a temporary structure to facilitate that use.
Will you give us a little nutshell description of the difference between the two?
Well, for example, right now, there's a section that talks about like snow cone shacks, for example, and it seems like it's inherent on the use through the building. And then there's other issues, for example, where sometimes an existing business wants a temporary use that's located outside of their permanent structure, underneath a canopy or a tent or something like that. And to facilitate a use that's already allowed in that zone, but to put it under a temporary structure like that, in breaking those two categories out makes it much easier and much less confusing as far as that section of the code goes.
Thank you.
The second point is where temporary uses are allowed. Right now, they are spelled out per the different temporary uses that it goes through, or per the different zoning districts. And what we're proposing is to open that up and allow temporary uses to exist in all non-residential zoning districts, and then several of the residential zoning districts, and then in very specific areas, such as a new category that's being provided or being suggested for fundraisers, even in a single-family residential district where a fundraiser may be able to occur for a couple of days, 2 or 3 days. And then there's been a long issue with certain seasonal item sales, which was connected to Christmas tree sales, and we're looking at changing that out so that there can be small, for example, food sales of different types. The way that it existed before, it made it seem like there were only very particular types of foods that could be sold, such as snow cones, like I had mentioned before, or food items that were connected to a holiday season, such as Christmas or an event or something like that. Also, the ability to sell something, whatever it may be, such as flowers at Memorial Day. And we're looking at changing the snow cone shaved huts or shaved ice huts to change that to temporary food service and other small scale temporary uses, which will bring all of that together and make it easier to use. And then the last point is,
Chris, can I ask a clarifying question
absolutely.
on that? So are you saying that, I'm gonna Lisa Adams here for a second and say that my family likes to buy our Christmas trees at Robinson Tree Lot at Nibley Golf Course, where they're not there anymore. And we could never buy hot chocolate there before. But now I had to go to South Salt Lakes Golf Course, where Robinson has now relocated. And then this year I could buy hot chocolate, and there was some food I could buy? So are you saying that when a Christmas tree lot type of operation applies for a permit to operate as Christmas tree lot, they can also sell food? That would be the change, or they would apply for a separate additional temporary use permit to do so?
Yeah, what we're getting at is the only food cells that could be allowed before was something that was attached to a specific seasonal event such as that.
So if it's Christmas, we want to eat more. If you are selling something Christmassy, you can sell a Christmassy food.
Right, but what we're doing is looking at breaking that out and not having it so closely aligned. So for example, if you wanted to sell apple cider just in the fall, for example, or sell it around Halloween or something like that, that would be allowed. In the past, it was very difficult to do that because it was only specifically tied to Christmas, for example. That was something that was a little bit difficult about the code at that point.
That is really bizarre.
Yes.
And that's the reason why we're doing this project. Our temporary use ordinance has been a complete disaster, and it's really hard to administer.
How do you really feel, Wayne?
It's been really hard to administer for the 15 plus years I've been here. So this is really to try to clean it up, to try to open some things up, make it a little bit more general, not so just pinpointed to such exact uses, but to say, hey, if you want to have a little, food sales thing, and it doesn't matter if it's a snow cone, but if you want to just have a little, ice cream shack or sell hot chocolate, you can do that. We're trying to do that to try to activate some of these.
And of course, all the regular food permit requirements apply, and
Absolutely.
that's separate and
Totally.
independent from us.
Yeah,
Okay.
all
I'm
dependent
sorry,
upon health.
I interrupted for clarification, but
Oh,
maybe
no
you were
problem at
not
all.
done.
Yeah, feel free. And like we said, we are trying to make it much more streamlined and much more open and provide more opportunities and not make it anywhere near as specific. It seemed like it grew up with very specific parts of it. The only specific point that we are planning to keep is Christmas tree cells, because based on that, they are generally sold in very specific locations, such as parking lots of golf courses that aren't being in use, and certain things such as that. And that is the one very specific use that we are looking to keep in here while generalizing pretty much everything else.
Council members, any questions? Councilmember Fowler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question. I truly don't know why this popped into my head while I was prepping for this, but so let's see that you mentioned in this briefing under one of the bullet points that the reason we would keep Christmas tree sales is that's very specific, and because we're kind of broadening other small scale temporary uses that would encompass whatever the Christmas tree may have thought about encompassing. But does the other small scale temporary uses only apply from that May 15th to that September 15th date?
No, we've changed that. We've opened up that time frame. We've gotten rid of that. That was one thing that was really limiting. What we're proposing is that it's a total of 120 days anytime throughout the year.
Okay, so if I wanted to sell pumpkins, this is the idea that came to my head today. I don't actually have a pumpkin patch, but I thought, what if I wanted to sell pumpkins instead of Christmas trees?
That's
for whatever
exactly it.
reason, would I be able to do that under this other small scale temporary uses?
Exactly.
Okay.
We're trying to open that up to all sorts of different things and not keep it so tightly controlled
And I
around
guess
that one season.
I may not have understood completely that we were changing that time frame to just be 120 days.
Yep.
Okay.
We were really limited on seasonal type things to where you couldn't even do some, temporary food kind of things in the wintertime because it only could happen during yeah, this is just it still puts that time frame on it because this is a temporary use chapter, but you can do it at any time of the year, so it opens it up.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I had one about, please go ahead, Councilmember Johnston.
Sorry. We see a lot of garage sales or yard sales that aren't necessarily in anybody's yard or anybody's garage. This theoretically, a zoning change to this would be any non-residential zone could have that in a lot, perhaps? Is that accurate?
You could, in a non-residential lot, you could do a little temporary sale event or something like that, yeah.
With a permit.
Yeah,
With the
if you
permit.
get
You'd
the
have to get a
permit.
specific permit, though, for that,
For the temporary use.
for the temporary use.
I mean, it depends on what you're doing, because if it's a residential use, it's one thing. I mean, there's, in specific zoning districts, each specific zoning district kind of regulates on whether or not you can do outdoor sale events. So sometimes the zoning comes into play on those, or the regular zoning comes into play.
Okay, thank you.
There was one other thing that I forgot to mention, sorry about that. After the fact, after this went to Planning Commission, legal was looking at it, and they made a suggestion to make a little tweak to the way that notice is given. If a temporary use permit has been given, but there's some issue and the city decides it needs to be shut down, they made a suggestion, just a tweak to the language that is included there. And have they received that, Nick? Has that been forwarded?
No, not yet.
Okay. So as written right now, it says that before a temporary use permit may be revoked, written notice of the decision to revoke shall be given to the permit holder. The notice shall inform the permit holder of the grounds for the revocation and advise the permit holder that the revocation shall be effective 24 hours from the date of the notice unless before the revocation of the notice, unless before the revocation date, the permit holder either, and then it goes on. But the language that's proposed to be changed would say, notice, before temporary use permit may be revoked, written notice the decision to revoke shall be served upon the permit holder or agent of the permit holder, either personally or by mail. The notice shall inform the permit holder of the grounds for the revocation and advise the permit, et cetera, et cetera. So it's simply a few words in one sentence, but they said that it would be better focusing on the word served upon instead of given to, and to the permit holder, and they're asking to add or agent of the permit holder, either personally or by mail.
So please just get us the language, and we have a public hearing set for February 6th.
Okay.
So let's make sure that that language is included
Yeah,
before we do
absolutely.
that. I had one question, which I understand. I think that it doesn't apply, but I think there's a great deal of interest in food trucks
Yes.
on this council. And I think we have a Holiday City council member even in the audience today. Holiday City has an awesome food truck park, which I've had past meetings about and understood that we have multiple hurdles in our zoning and our ordinance that prevent us from having such an awesome food truck park. And I just wanted to make sure that this isn't one of them, that there isn't some temporary use here that would apply to food trucks.
Yeah, this temporary use section does not apply to food trucks or food carts whatsoever. Those mobile kind of businesses are taken care of in other sections of the code. That is in section 21A.36 is where you can go to get information about that. We do have a specific section that is about a mobile food court it doesn't address any of this. I guess if we wanted to make tweaks to that, then we could do that through a separate text amendment.
I just wanted to make sure that while we have this open, that it does not apply.
We do recognize that we have some issues with our mobile food court ordinance. It's pretty limiting on where it can go. But again, it took a long time to write that ordinance, and we didn't want to get hung up in trying to fix this and open that other. But we do, excuse me, we do know that that is something that's on our list of things that we know we need to change. It's a long priority list right now. So.
Well, we're hungry for you to change it. Wah, wah, wah. Is that it, council members, on this item? Councilmember
And
Wharton?
really driven
Whoa.
for you to make those changes. So park yourself in front of a computer.
Warm up the fryer and get to work on this. Thank you, Chris, Wayne, Nick.
All right, thank you.
All right, we already had our break, so we're on to item 7, the resolution for public benefits analysis of the waiver of vehicle charging station fees. We should have Russell Weeks and perhaps Vicki Bennett. And anyone else? who'd like
Madam
to
Chair,
come up?
Randy Hillier is also here from Finance, and if she'd like, Megan DePaulis is available too.
We have 4 mics. You're all welcome. Thank you. Russell, are you going to begin our discussion tonight?
Well, this is really quick. The goal of the briefing is that to determine whether the council is ready to forward this resolution to a public benefits study on February 6th. And if so, that will be on the consent agenda. This is a resolution that would eliminate charging monetary fees for electrical chargers at 62 stations for either permanently or up to 12 months. That's the transmittal estimates that it would cost about $25,000 to waive the fees for 12 months. And however, the administration also says it's willing to do a study to get some empirical data on the cost of waiving the fees, the cost to the city, and present a study in the spring. One question is one study enough, or would you like to extend the study to get more information?
Anything else you want to add in before we
I don't have
take a
anything to
bite?
add except that the $25,000 would be split between public services and airport, $12,000 for public services and $13,000 for the airport.
Okay. Council members? Questions, comments, concerns, ideas? Really? Hot dog, please,
Question?
Councilmember Johnston.
Can I ask sort of why? I mean, it's only level 2 charging stations, not all. It's sort of 2 areas essentially, but any sense of where this is coming from?
When we first put in electric vehicle charging stations, boy, it's been 4 or 5 years when we put the first few in, and at that point they were free because there were so few electric vehicles, and we're working on incentivizing people who own them because of the air quality benefits. And we feel like there's a definite benefit to us as a city to promote electric vehicles. Then when we put the second round of charging stations in, we went back and found that something had been lost in the fee schedule, because we thought that it had said we could waive the fees, but somewhere between in a transmittal or something, it didn't get in there. So it required us with that second round of charging stations to start charging. At that point, we found people just stopped using the charging stations and were afraid they stopped commuting in their electric vehicles. We have a very low uptake of electric vehicles still, less than 1%. The people we would really like to get to drive them would be, perhaps from the suburbs, and incentivize them not to drive their polluting vehicles into the city. So while we're charging now, the number of actual uses has dropped significantly. And the estimate we said was for the level 2, about 30%. For the level 3, which is not included in this because that really does provide a major service, but a lot less people are using it. It's over half of a decline. So our goal is to try and test it out for a while, see if we could provide it, eliminate the charge, incentivize people to use it, get some data, see how much it really costs. The $25,000 is an estimate based on how much we think it will be used. And then, depending on your request, we can come back in 3-6 months and report on specifics, decide if we want to keep the fees eliminated, change the fees. We're going to have a lot more data from other cities as to what reasonable fees would be, and this will help us out.
What time frame would you recommend for a study that would give you sufficient evidence or information?
Well, the 25,000 is an estimate for a year, so I would like to have about 6 months to really take a look and then get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Worth saying that when it says that it would be done in the spring, I think that the notion was when we sent this in October that, that was a reasonable amount of time. Now, where we are, we may want to look at more like the summer months to anticipate something like that.
It would take that long, you think, to get there?
I think to get a good cross-section, enough data to really be able to look at our electric bills and be able to see what the trend is, yes, I'd recommend that.
Okay.
Great. Anybody else? So it sounds like we would like to not look for a estimate to come back to us until the fall, perhaps at the earliest, not this spring.
I think that would be good, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Then that's it, folks. Thank you, Randy and Vicki, Russell. We will look for, we're going to set the public hearing date tonight, have a public hearing on the 6th, and we could do tentative council action on the 20th. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Northwest Quadrant, we're 15 minutes behind. I'm sorry, I know we have people in our audience who've been waiting for this item. I've got Jennifer Bruno coming up to the table. Danny Walls, welcome. I thought you were just here because these meetings are so much fun.
Both reasons, yes.
Great. Jennifer, do you want to kick us off?
There's a motion sheet in your packets to consider when you go across the hall, but maybe I'll defer to the RDA to go over sort of the main highlights. There are 2 development agreements, but they're pretty similar in terms of their actual facts, so I'll leave it to Danny to cover.
Excellent. First, let me say thank you. I think this is my first time doing a council meeting briefing.
Welcome.
So I'll reiterate again on behalf of the administration and all of the city departments who have had a hand in this. Thank you again for all of the cooperation of the council and specifically the council staff as we've put this packet of information together for you. So this item is a resolution this evening for both the City Council and RDA Board consideration for approving the development agreements with 2 of the primary landowners out in the Northwest Quadrant. The purpose of this agreement follows up on what you as a council and a board did last week in terms of approving the CRA plan as well as the interlocal between the agency and Salt Lake City, and initially taking those steps to creating the project area, setting forth the mechanism of utilizing tax increment. And now what you have before you today is taking that next step in terms of building that relationship with the property owners as far as actually putting them in a position to market and develop their properties and create a funding mechanism for doing so and building the infrastructure and utilities that are necessary out in the Northwest Quadrant. So the 3 categories within this development agreement, and as Jennifer said, there's 2 of them, so 1 with each property owner, is essentially it vests them in terms of the zoning rights within the M1 zone for development of the Northwest Quadrant. The second is it builds a relationship and an agreement to cooperate with the property owners as the city and the developers work hand in hand, as well as with the state in terms of the prison construction, in terms of providing the utilities and the infrastructure that is necessary out in the Northwest Quadrant. So this is everything from the roads to the sewer, water, as well as storm drain. And then finally, it starts putting in place the funding mechanisms that are available to the developers as part of their agreement with the city. And this takes into account everything from the impact fees to the tax increment reimbursement to potentially pioneering agreements, depending on what the status is and what type of infrastructure and utility we're looking at building. So those are the main parts within the development agreement. I'm happy to answer any questions in terms of the process. Tammy is here as well to answer any details on where we're at with some of these. And then, of course, if you feel inclined, Katie would love to come and speak to you in terms of the legal requirements as well. So I will defer to you, Madam Chair, in terms of what you would like from us next.
Council members, this isn't a new subject to us. It's become a weekly subject for us. Are there any questions that we haven't yet addressed in last week's meeting or previous meetings? It's pretty straightforward, folks.
Appreciate that.
And just on a note of logistics, you'll convene across the hall as the council to consider this, and then you'll also have a special RDA board meeting to consider it as the RDA board because it's a tri-party agreement with the RDA, the city, and each developer.
Great, thank you.
Excellent.
We started late, but we finished early on that item. We'll move on to item 9. Jennifer, would you mind staying at the table with us? It's an ordinance on the budget amendment number 3 for fiscal year 17-18.
And the intention of this item, the administration transmitted budget amendment number 3, and it only includes funding for the Smith's Ballpark lights, which the council has already discussed. We listed this again because there was some interest of some council members to add an additional item to the budget for Local First. So it was really just to preserve that opportunity for the council to discuss if there's a majority of the council that wants to add that to budget amendment number 3 before the public hearing happens on, I think, the 6th.
Cindy, did you have anything to add?
Just based on some of the questions that council members asked, I apologize, I should have taken time to email this to you, but I had some conversations with administrative folks last week, and I think the issue that has come up is whether this is a membership, so to speak, or a relationship like we have with the Salt Lake Area Chamber of Commerce and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, whether it fits into that category or whether it's some kind of a contract. And we may have previously been putting a square peg into a round hole by having this entity have a contract with the city. So if you could give us a little bit of opportunity to work with the attorney's office and the administration to see, would it make sense to convert this into a membership type situation or an affiliation rather than a contract with specific outcomes? I think that might solve the confusion and problems that got us to this point. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah. I see 2 confused faces, Cindy.
Okay.
Can I put it into other words and then you can correct me? Because this is the first I'm hearing of this also, but that I will say that James and Derek and I met with Local First recently about this, and unfortunately neither of them could be here at the moment, but that Salt Lake City has been investing about $20,000 pretty much every year for over a decade in Local First, and really helped to foster, nurture that organization into existence for the purpose of supporting and growing local business districts in our neighborhoods, et cetera. That we've been a funding partner there for a very, very long time. And that there's some context to that we were unaware of to the elimination of that funding on the economic development side of things in the administration. The feeling that Derek and James and I shared was really that the investment that Salt Lake City has made and we believe should continue to make in Local First doesn't necessarily have to do with completion of a specific project each year or some new task that we're asking them to do, although the relationship is open, as Local First has clearly articulated. They're open to working on projects with us or that we have an interest in. It wasn't meant to be bound to some product like that. And so we wanted to add the funding back in here to sustain that organization the way that we feel was the intention. But that's here for us to discuss as a body. So, Cindy, it makes sense that like other business supporting organizations in the city, like you have mentioned, where we decide to pay a membership due to support the organization and support our potential for collaboration with those organizations. This is another economic development oriented, business supportive organization that it may be easier to look at as a relationship and not a product.
And you can attach any kind of conditions, if you choose to do this, you can attach any kind of conditions that you want or invite the administration to recommend conditions. So there's a great deal of flexibility there. It's just that it's a small organization and they are adding value in enabling small businesses to to grow and that type of a thing. But they're probably not the people that you would go to if you wanted a statistically relevant survey or analysis of something. It's a small organization, and that's the kind of thing that the administration was looking for, and so they put this out to bid. It hadn't been put out to bid for quite a while, and another organization was awarded the bid because that's the business they are in, is doing economic analysis and that type of a thing.
So we took the funding we previously had allocated for Local First and granted it to another entity. Is that correct?
Yes, and it wasn't specifically allocated for Local First. It was for small business development, I think. They asked for some flexibility in doing that, and for the need that they advertised and that they legitimately had, Local First was not the best fit. And so that's why they didn't give the funding to Local First and did to this other organization. As far as I know, they have no objection to continuing to work with Local First and that type of a thing. It's, and we can, double check all that if there's enough interest on the part of the council, but it's just a matter of role clarity probably, and how do you want to categorize this square peg, round hole kind of thing.
So are we hearing that you could come back to us before this budget amendment is completed?
I think we could, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the goal was just to get a sense of, from a noticing standpoint, if you wanted to include this in the materials so that it was clear that this was on the board for consideration prior to the public hearing that'll be on the 6th. So we won't maybe have all the technical details of how it will work out before the 6th, but that the public hearing would have that information for the public.
Council members, were there any questions or issues with the ballpark funding item here? Okay.
Do you want to do a straw poll so we know if we're okay to go ahead
Yes,
and list
good idea.
this? Thank you.
Shall I make it? Anyone else?
Straw poll as far as the Local First concept?
Proceeding to do the follow-up and having it as a possibility for your action on the agenda. So not saying yes, you want to do it, but just yes, it's okay to keep working on it. We have 3 council members interested, but I don't know if we have a majority.
What doesn't get worked on in the meantime then?
I think we're probably talking half an hour of time.
That's why I'm asking. I
Yeah.
don't know the amount of time and what
Yeah,
sort of
probably,
doesn't get
yeah.
done.
I mean, I've already had the conversation. I just want to double check my understanding and coordinate with the attorney's office to be sure I'm not making things up.
Okay, straw poll, is that clear? In support of the staff continuing to investigate this possible financing for the budget amendment. Okay, we've got all 5 of us with Rogers and Kitchen absent. Great, thank you. And that concludes
Yep, that's
Budget
it.
Amendment 3 item for us.
Yep.
And we will be looking at public hearing on the 6th, tentative council action on the 20th. Okay, our last item on the agenda and before the standing items is our legislative issues. Lynn, come on up here. David, you want to come on up to do? It's going to be an awfully long dinner break if this is a short discussion. Everyone can go home for an hour and a half. Oh, we do have an executive session, that's right.
And we'll speak slowly.
You need not, just not as fast as an earlier speaker today.
Yes, this item is on the agenda, but we don't have a great deal of additional information because, of course, the session hasn't started yet. Next week looms large on the horizon, but and by the way, I should thank all of you for your participation in the legislative breakfast we had on Friday. I think that was a good discussion, and we appreciate you being there. But anyway, I think we are mostly here to answer questions about issues you may be aware of or things you want to talk about. Do you have any direction for us, Madam Chair?
Madam Chair, maybe I do have two quick items to update on as follow-up from last week's discussion. Councilmember Wharton asked about Operation Rio Grande, anything that we're anticipating. So I did inquire, and we do anticipate there will be a budget item for the state funding for Operation Rio Grande. I believe that it will most likely be handled through executive appropriations and not any particular appropriations subcommittee, that it will come directly from executive appropriations. And then Councilmember Luke asked about our outreach efforts to this point on some of the water related legislation with other municipalities, and I did hear from Laura Briefer that she has been in touch with some of the cities of the first class, Provo, Sandy, and Ogden, who also share our concerns, particularly about the extraterritorial jurisdiction legislation, House Bill 136, and the Representative Coleman's legislation, House Bill 124 on the water surplus. And so we are doing that outreach, and we'll be working closely with allied cities.
Thank you. There were a few other follow-ups, but I didn't keep my notes, of course. I just threw them over there, and
of course.
One other item that
now
I
I don't
do
remember.
that I do have as a follow-up, Madam Chair, is the legislation on the Central Wasatch Commission. And there hasn't been any development on that, but we will definitely keep that in front of everyone.
Councilmember Fallard?
Can we, going back to the budget item for the funding for ORG, do they have any further information regarding what they're anticipating putting that money for through Operation Rio Grande? Are we finally getting to phase 3 of the treatment? I mean, can you give me a little?
Sure, we currently are implementing all 3 phases of Operation Rio Grande. The best way to answer that right now, not knowing the details or having that information directly in front of me, is when Operation Rio Grande was developed and the budget was put together. It was about a $62 million budget, which included all 3 phases. And some of the state dollars were appropriated during the special session for the current fiscal year. And so what we would anticipate, I would imagine, is appropriation for the next fiscal year for some of those costs, including state law enforcement, treatment dollar commitments, as well as the employment piece.
Okay.
And that obviously will become more clear as that.
Sure. Anything else? Councilmember Wharton, please.
Yeah, there's the Tribune reported on also HB 136 about federal designations and localities, commenting on that. And I remember that was mentioned at the legislative breakfast meeting. Is there any update on that?
No, I think what you've seen is the dialogue that we're hearing about that bill, and that is that it's been rolled out, that people are commenting sort of from the sidelines, but I don't know that there's been a lot more dialogue, particularly a dialogue with the sponsor, at least at this point, but I expect that will follow.
Would it be prudent to reach out to other municipalities on that, or do you think that that's not necessary?
That is one of the pieces of legislation that we are working on with other municipalities. Absolutely.
Excellent. All right, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Sure. There is one other item, if I might, that I wanted to bring to your attention. We mentioned last week in our discussion that there's a number of really sort of a broad range of issues that they're discussing in terms of tax-related issues or tax reform. One of those that certain key legislators are very intent upon pursuing is a sales tax exemption for manufacturing inputs. And just by way of the history of this item, the concept there was always not to tax items twice. And so if items were sold with the intent to be resold and incorporated into manufactured products, they wanted to exempt those from sales tax. At the time this was done years ago, they didn't have the funds to do a complete exemption. So they did an exemption down to the 3-year time frame. They're now looking to complete that. The challenge with that bill is that it will have about approximately an $80 million fiscal note for the state. And that's always been the impediment. It also has about a $20 million fiscal impact for cities and towns, $4 million of which would be felt in Salt Lake City. The challenge we've got with that bill is that while there's a significant fiscal note on both the state side and the local side, if the state can find the way to come up with the $80 million to take that hit, they won't think twice about the hit to the local government. And so that's one piece among many that is in this tax reform or tax-related discussion. We don't yet know whether, as I said, whether those will be individual bills or an omnibus bill, but they're still talking about modifications to the truth in taxation process for property tax, the manufacturing sales tax exemption, and then some kind of even the prospect of an inflationary adjustment to property tax. All of those may or may not be addressed separately, or they may be addressed globally, but that dialogue is continuing. Just want to let you know that that's out there, and we're continuing to explore the possibilities and watching.
Were you able to attend that Economic Outlook and Public Policy Summit this morning?
I did not attend that meeting this morning. I got a report from others who were there. However, a number of issues raised, and it's really a question. A number of key legislators raising issues, and what we don't know is how many of those will result in specific pieces of legislation, or whether they will just cover the discussion on the existing landscape. But we're monitoring that process.
Okay, anything? Thank you, and thanks to our own legislative subcommittee for the work you're doing and you're about to put in
Okay.
in the upcoming session.
Thank you very much.
We're here for you all.
We will keep in touch.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to our standing items with a report and announcements from our executive director.
Okay. There is a conference coming up. It's the National Conference on Ending Family and Youth Homelessness. It is Thursday, March 1 and Friday, March 2 in Los Angeles. And it's not one of the conferences that the council typically attends, but that doesn't mean you could not choose to. So I'm not sure if a council member requested this or if the staff just noticed it and is bringing it to your attention. So the question is, number one is, if council members were interested, would the council be supportive of funding that from the existing budget? And number two, are there council members interested?
Are there, can we reverse those?
Yes, yes, I
Is
should have
anyone
said in
interested
any order. Yeah.
in attending?
I'd be interested.
I'm interested in you attending.
I'm not interested in Los Angeles, let's be clear, but
I'm very passionate about, but I don't know if it fits.
I'm interested but not able to make that time, so.
I guess I wonder if you're also interested in attending again the National Alliance to End Homelessness Conference this year as well. That one was in June last year, or July? July?
yeah, it's a much bigger one, I think.
And I'll be honest, I mean, so I went last year, I didn't go the first year. I was less than impressed with my experience last year, and I just didn't think that, I felt like it was too big, and I thought that a lot of the issues that we're dealing with are unique enough or different enough that I didn't really take away anything that great. But Aaron, I know that you went the year before, and you really.
No, I only went last year.
Oh, you only went last year? Okay.
Yeah,
Someone went the year before, and I thought.
Yeah, I've gone.
Maybe it was you,
previously,
and so.
The national one is in DC for a reason.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be large. It's supposed to be see your legislators, those kind of things. The that going to local like LA, for instance, in this case, is much more interesting in some ways to look at their initiatives because they put a lot of money towards this. Well, for them, it's not a lot of money. For us, it would be a ton. That's where the interest would be in going to Los Angeles.
No,
to
that's
see
and
their
that's where I
program,
think
so.
that makes more sense even than the national one. So
One of the takeaways from the DC conference that we were both at last year was, for me, an interest in the women's specific research they've done in Los Angeles, and they have some facilities for women specifically. And I would love it if anybody who goes to this conference can bring us back any information that might apply to our coming facility for women. But I'm in support of council using funds. Do we want a straw poll on this, Cindy?
I think as long as there's sounds like there's support, so. Okay. All right, the next item, the Downtown Alliance has their urban exploration planned in Minneapolis on Wednesday, April 18th through Saturday, April 21. There have been some council members who've indicated an interest to attend. This is one of the things that are pre-approved by the council because it is a reoccurring thing that has been determined to be valuable. The staff is asking me to double check here to be sure I have a clear idea of who is going. Is anybody not going that?
yeah,
was
so
planning,
this
or-
this is one that I've been fortunate enough to go to every year. The Downtown Alliance has done a really good job. Last year, I think was probably one of the weaker, the weaker one, but still, it was. I think there were still some things that were helpful, especially in terms of some ideas about partnering on affordable housing. So, my experience has been good, but I'm not able to make it this year. But I would say, especially for the two new council members, this one's a good one to go to.
You're going.
I'm planning on it. Why are you like that, Andrew? You get your own room. You don't have to bunk with us.
The value of this is interesting in that you have a cross-section of people from the business community also going. Okay, so Andrew.
I would be interested. I need to check and see a scheduling thing still. So
Okay, that's it. Thank you. Now you.
Okay, there's no report of the chair and vice chair as far as I'm aware. Not yet. And we are going to go into closed session. Could I have someone make a motion for item F?
Madam Chair, I move that we go into closed session for the purpose of discussing deployment of security personnel, devices, or systems. So.
Now, roll call. Councilmember Luke? Yes. Councilmember Fowler?
Yes.
Councilmember Wharton?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnston?
yes.
And I'm a yes. Thank you. We will reconvene at 7 o'clock across the hall for our formal meeting. And will the RDA convening take place in the formal meeting?
Yes,
Chambers?
that's my understanding.
Okay.
You're welcome.